Don't hear anything.
You're muted.
Hello. Can anyone hear me?
I'm muted. I was muted. So can you hear me?
Oh, they can hear me.
Yeah, they can hear me and Joe, Matt says. Okay. Okay, well, while
After
you. We're waiting for Aziz to fix his sound. So we have a lot of stuff to talk about. In the intro, we wanted to mention we're going to talk about how this might line up with the Fagon plot. There's a lot of talk about that. We were just saying how this, that plot's absence from the show has had big impacts, and we'll be talking about how some of that might jive with the books. And of course, we're going to have a discussion about a lot of character deaths and talking about what things might be similar in the books. What else, Joe?
Yeah, like you say, the Fagon plot features really heavily, but just through looking for our notes in preparation for this, as like most episodes, when you take a second look or second watch, there's so much that can bleed through into the books that I didn't catch on first watch or second watch. We've got some really good questions that really spark our minds, so we'll get into that as well.
Yeah. I want to note that a lot of my prep for this episode, surprisingly, had to just came down to pulling quotes from the books, because there is a lot to discuss in terms of how these events are related to the book storylines.
Check. Hey, can you guys hear me yet? Okay, so now they can hear me. All right.
Oh,
okay.
Good.
All right. Well,
over to you.
The microphone dropped out of the settings for something. Shay warned me this might happen. It's a weird technical glitch. Okay, let's call that a false start. Okay, wiggly. Do the old Wayne and Garth thing. Hello. Hello, my fellow Westorians. We're here. We're starting 10 minutes late after a little false start, but hey, it's all good now. Fun times with technology and me wearing multiple hats. No Ashaya today, so of course something goes wrong right away, but hey, that just shows you how valuable she is. It's like an illustration in real time.
She might have planned it.
Yeah. It was sabotage. I'm telling all y'all, sabotage. So let's get to it. There's a lot to say. I think there's, amidst all the arguing and frustration and shattered expectations, we can see the story beats that George put into here. Whether they were handled well or not is another topic, frankly. But I'm more interested in what those topics are. What George intended, I think, is in a lot of ways more interesting than what we actually got. And what we actually got has a lot of value, even with that in mind. So we're going to have a lot to say today. We've had some great thoughts the last few days. It's the last 20 minutes even, like getting right up to the minute here. We were talking about some really neat things, some great takes, some getting it all into the words you want, the way you want to express it. That's one of the difficulties here when, we only have 72 hours or 96 hours to get our thoughts together. You have the thoughts in your head, but you can't quite express them the way you want. So anyway, that's just that's neither here nor there. So let's get to it. Welcome back, Lady Gwyn, and thanks for filling in for me there for a minute.
Okay, good to be here.
And welcome back to the show, Joe Buckley. Your first appearance went so well that we didn't waste any time bringing you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Obviously, I didn't do too badly. I'll try and not immediately make you regret having me back.
Right on, right on. So let me give a few shout outs real quick. Thank you to all the patrons who make this show possible. We've had a wonderful surge in patronage here during the season, and I hope that we can continue it after the season, because as rushed as the season was, our ability to unpack George's intent here has been rushed as well. So we're going to go back and look at a lot of these plot lines, because there's a lot more that we surely missed that we didn't have enough time to look at. I mean, heck, 3 weeks ago, we're trying to get into Azor Ahai and the conclusion of Azor Ahai, and now we're like, hardly have time to talk about Jaime and Cersei's entire arc concluding because we're so distracted by this incredible Dany twist and all this other stuff. It's like, and so many other characters dying. And it's amazing that we'd be sitting here thinking to ourselves, damn, we don't have time to talk about the end of Jaime and Cersei. Like, what? But here we are. So thank you to Jeff Gnarly the Long Snapper, History of Westeros' first sword. And thank you to our dragon riders. That includes Lord Mark of House Joseph, the Snow and Winterfell, rider of Mazlacartho, the white dragon with green scales, horns, wings, and talons. Talanis the Talon, king of Gagassos, rider of Talarius, the red dragon with scales, horns, and talons of Midnight Black. Robert IV of House Ardeacor, Burn King of Blazewater Bay, rider of Atraxis, a black dragon with bioluminescent spots like smoldering embers and a banded blue tail. And Jinx of House Lier, Green Queen of the Rainwood, rumored daughter of a woods witch, rider of Erogenia, a sylphic albino dragon with amethyst eyes and opalescent wings. Also want to give a shout out to Lord Mitch of House Bailey, who is having a kidney transplant. So from all of your friends and fellow Westorians here, best of luck, and I hope this podcast finds you well when you wake up and get to hear it. Let's start also with 1, 2/3 other announcements real quick. Thank you to May Jernigan for my wonderful House Blackmont shirt that I got at Ice and Fire Con. Also shout out to Ice and Fire Con. And I want to give a couple of shout outs to 2 different online communities where you can discuss the episode with History of Westeros. One of them is the Flick community. Flick is online chat community that's highly moderated and new for us. And so far, we've got things like we're discussing things like battle tactics and episode 6 predictions, rather. And a lot of fun stuff like that. And if Flick is not for you, well, I also recommend our Facebook group. Shout out our mods, Laura Boros, Rabea, Bloody Ben, Ahema Helminth, a.k.a. Thomas Pappas, that is, and Ari, a.k.a. Lady Lajara Dajo. Lots of great folks there. Great discussion to be had in a variety of places. Kind of just take your pick which social media outlet you prefer, and there's something for you. All right, so I want to start with the genius of George R. Martin. This is one of the things that has come out about this episode is all these things buried deep. And, let me start with something that one of our patrons sent us in. We got a lot of feedback on this episode from listeners and Westorians, and there's so many great takes. So here's one that got us thinking. From Michael Brignolo: while there were still some grievances, the more I think about this episode, the more I like it. I think this episode was really unique in a way that it was brutally unsurprising and uncompromising. Well, some might disagree that it was with the surprising part or unsurprising part. It was definitely uncompromising, and it is kind of unique for TV. I've never seen anything like that on TV, where someone that we've seen as a good guy has just done such a dark thing to so many people. And is that kind of how would you guys describe that? Lady Gwyn, start with you. Just the highest level take you can give before we get into the more meaty of the details. Just the way that moment felt for you and as a TV event. What do you think?
Well, it was shocking. I mean, it's in one word, it was shocking, and it took a lot of going back and thinking and rewatching to kind of unpack all the details, which we'll try to do later on. But yeah, in terms of seeing it as a television spectacle, I think the word uncompromising is a pretty good one, because it was that for sure, and brought so many of the themes that we know George loves to use in his writing, right to the fore, right in your face. So yeah.
And what about you, Joe? What did you think of that moment? I know you had an overall very positive view of the episode, but that doesn't mean you loved every part of it.
No, it doesn't. But as an overall, you said the word TV event, and I think that's definitely, you can picture in years to come how they're going to use cuts and shots of this to sum up the whole series, because this is what it is. This is what happens when the game goes really wrong. And like Jorah and Varys have told us, and others, we've seen who suffers, and that really came across in a quite brutal manner. And I just think it was so powerful, and it's not just the awesomeness of seeing a dragon burn a fleet and all the scorpions, but also the darker side of seeing children and husbands and wives and all these things. It really got across quite well. It's quite funny because I'm in England. Most of my friends will watch it the next day at 4:00 whenever they get home, so I can look at my phone and expect all these texts to come in, and sure enough they did. Of same thing, my mother watched it and just texted me the word powerful in capital letters. That gets across very well.
Yeah, so let me continue with what Michael here had to say. I thought it was really good. He says, ever since she's come to Westeros, she has been further set back through immense losses and betrayed by virtually everyone she trusted, especially Tyrion, Varys, and most importantly, Jon. She snaps and chooses to rule through fear when she realizes that no one in Westeros loves her and never will. All of a sudden, the bells ring, the opponent surrenders, and the battle seems to be won. Now, here's where I want to take over from him. And let me add one more point he writes here. He says, she simply is at the end of her arc, and what to do now? She keeps telling herself in the book, if I look back, I am lost. She does the only thing she can do to continue and goes forward with her plan. And this is where the hidden genius of George really comes out, I think. And with the way some of these themes are hidden. And that is... that they are...
The stream's gone off as well.
Yeah. Oh, has it? The whole thing went off?
Oh, no, it's come back.
Okay, yeah. We dropped out for a second. It figures that the day Shay is not here, all sorts of random things are going wrong. I'm in the middle of talking and it just drops. Okay.
Job security.
Yeah, right? That proves it. So, so basically what I want to get at here is that Dany's entire arc has been a revenge arc, and we didn't realize it, or at least we didn't fully realize it. We were rooting for her all along because George R. R. Martin did everything to make us like her. It's a really brilliant setup. He did all these things to make us like her and sympathize with her that we never really, as our friend Eden wrote, on Twitter, @Eden wrote, very appropriate Twitter handle there. He wrote, we are too preoccupied worrying about her well-being and rooting for her to overcome the trauma she's endured, and we never stop to evaluate her poisonous quest as a whole. George buried the poison in our sympathy, and now we're getting the taste of it. That's a great take. And let me just give a few examples of how he set us up. She's a young girl, abused, married off to a barbarian who rapes her. Okay, so who's not going to feel sympathy right off the bat? You're going to be like, oh, this horrible situation this girl is in. Oh, my goodness. And then she rises all above that. She performs a miracle. And then she does the thing that, is probably the most... Like, who doesn't love someone that frees the slaves? I mean, that's like the most over-the-top thing you can do to make you like somebody. Like, this is the most just thing a person can do. And then... That's why her turn becomes so hard to witness, because we've been rooting for her and she does all these great things, but we never stop to realize that this whole quest of hers is awful. She was her little brother, or rather her older brother, imparted all this violence in her and told her that this was taken from them and they should take it back. That's revenge. That's that is what it is. And to me, that's really brilliant that this is paired with a much more simplistic revenge arc coming from Sandor Clegane, which is very blatant and obvious. And then we get her, at the end, he's telling telling Arya to not do that. He may as well have been speaking to Dany. If he had been saying those same things to Dany, well, Dany'd be like, wait, who the hell are you again? But if it was, say, coming from, I don't know, Jon or somebody that she trusted, I don't know if there's anyone she trusts left, but let's say there was, then it would be, I don't know. I'll let you guys weigh in on this. I've been rambling for a minute. This is a good example of having all these great thoughts that we can't quite put into words succinctly yet, but you can kind of see where a lot of this is going. So please, Joe, you start this time. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, I think the Sandor connection is the one to look at here. When he talks to Arya, and I know we'll get into this later, but when he's saying kind of, look what it's done to me, now we've seen what it's done to Daenerys. This is a years-long mission and quest she's been on, and when something goes on that long, you can trick yourself into thinking whatever you like about it, as we have also been tricked, but she hasn't done anything that Viserys didn't tell her to do. It's the same original plan from season 1. It's just been 7 seasons since we really had to think about it.
Yeah, isn't that strange, right? Like, Viserys proved himself to be awful. She realized he was awful. She realized that he was never a true dragon or so, and just it became clear he was a bad brother. But she's still on this kind of quest that he put her on. And yeah, Lady Gwyn, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think, Viserys, for whatever it's worth, he just imparted that sense of entitlement to her that he had. She could rise above some of the other personality traits that he had and that she found distasteful, but the core of what they were all about, their whole young life with this one goal, that's a touchstone that it's really hard to get away from. And as far as Sandor goes, I love the fact that in the end, it was Sandor who said to Arya and to all of us, choose life. Don't be like me. This is not the way. This is not the way to go. It's too late for me. My path is laid, and I have to conclude it. But choose life. And if those words had been imparted to Dany by someone else, whether she would have been able to overcome her kind of programming, I don't know. But it's a great contrast right in this episode that is really clear when you rewatch it with those thoughts in mind. So.
Right on. Very well said. So also, I want to point out how neat it is that with connecting Dany to Sandor, something that I never thought I would do, but here we are, fitting really well, how fire is such a big part of it all, too. And how Sandor is afraid of fire, and how Dany was we see her as someone that was reluctant a lot of times to use her fire. And when she did, it was terrifying. And now that she really did, well, yep, it's really terrifying. And, this is why this kind of thing needs to be handled really delicately and with a lot of nuance. And this is where the show, has left a lot of people feeling like they didn't handle it well. Because I'm not sure that Dan and Dave grasped any of this. I don't know if they noticed this revenge business with Dany, and they noticed some of it maybe on a different level, like a lot of us did, that something's not right about this quest of hers. But they maybe didn't connect it so, specifically like we just did to a lot of these concepts. And yeah, so I really wonder, if they had thought about it differently, if they would have maybe written the episode a little bit differently as well. I really like the idea of thinking about her in that moment when the bells are ringing and how she's realizing that that's supposed to be it. It's supposed to be a win. This is it. Homecoming. All this time she's been wanting to come home. But this victory, it's the moment of victory, and it's not. It doesn't feel like victory at all. It doesn't feel like a win. And that's because revenge isn't supposed to feel like a win. It's supposed to turn to ashes in your mouth. And quite literally, it's ash everywhere in this city. It's really interesting the way these literal themes, these themes are coming out literally. The whole concept of ash and the idea of ashes in your mouth as the end result of revenge, which has been a long running way to express revenge in the literary world for forever, as long as there's been a literary world. So I'm just, my head is really spinning over all these concepts coming together. And like I said, some of this was about 30 minutes before we started this episode. So it's still spinning. We're still spinning, folks. We're still spinning. You're spinning. You're here spinning with us. So let's, do you guys have any more to say about the moment, her turning moment? We'll get back to it. But if you have anything, if you want to respond to what I just said, let's do that. Otherwise, we'll move on to our first set of questions.
Yeah, let's move on. I know I have some thoughts, but down below, and we can definitely get back to
cool.
more Danny.
Well, let's do that. First off, from Chris Nanny. This is a good lead-in question, especially as there's a few of you out there, more than a few maybe, who haven't read all the books or haven't read them at all. And now that the show is ending, there's a few of you who are looking for a bit of a primer on where to start and how to read them properly. So this is from Chris Nanny. I've watched the show and listened to numerous podcasts due to my interest in the world George R. R. Martin has created. I was wondering what the best order to read the books is. Obviously, the main 5 in a row. Well, that's not even necessarily true, the 5 in a row. But hold off on that for a second. But should I read the Dunk and Egg novellas before the main series or after? Or Fire and Blood? I plan on reading everything that has to do with the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. I just want to know how you guys suggest I do it. Well, honestly, this is something I probably should think about more. My own experience isn't really possible to mirror because you can't come into the fandom in the same order. Do you guys have any suggestions, Lady Gwyn or Joe? Do you have a reading order you prefer? Any thoughts on which history books to do first? I don't know that there's a wrong way to do it other than like blatantly reading things out of order, like reading Clash of Kings before Game of Thrones or something like that.
Right.
Let's go backwards.
Read them backwards. Maybe you'll find a secret message. So I don't know. I'm a fan of reading the 5 books in a row. I don't know if I talked about it here, but I've recently realized that Feast Dance is an interesting way to approach books 4 and 5, but I prefer to read them the way they were presented because of the proximity, the chapter, the way he reveals things in separate chapters, and you might almost lose some of those proximity type of things.
Let me jump in for a second to explain what Feast Dance is for anyone who doesn't know.
Oh, probably.
It's a recommended reading order for reading Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons together, because the way those 2 books worked out in reality is that George split them into having a bunch of POVs in one of them, and then those same POVs weren't in the other. Like there's several characters who just don't appear in A Feast for Crows at all. And then several who don't appear in Dance with Dragons. And only a few of them are in both. And so some people have come up with a modified version of the reading order that takes chapters from Feast for Crows, merges them with the Dance with Dragons, not merges the chapters literally, but merges the order of the 2, and it goes from there. So just to build on what Lady Gwyn said, I think the Feast Dance is a good way to read it, but I don't think it's, like she said, I don't think it's a good way to read it the first time. If you're going to read it multiple times, it's a great alternate, but I don't know that it's a good first time way to do it. Yeah. Joe, what do you think about reading order? Do you have any thoughts on that, or on the order of reading the historical material, or Dunk and Egg?
I haven't tried Feast Dance, but then I imagine I'll just keep rereading these books forever, so I'm sure I will try it at one point. I don't know if it would work for me. I think similar to what Lady Gwyn said, the themes too separate between Feast and Dance. I think especially Feast, I think it's so kind of wrapped up in itself. It needs to be given due attention. The historical ones, no, I've never really thought about it, if I'm honest. I read the World one straight after, obviously Fire and Blood when it came. I think you can save Dunk and Egg for a little bit, just to, when you've really started missing the main series, it can be a bit of a pick-me-up. That's what I did, waited a little bit. So maybe that's recommended.
That's a pretty good idea. Maybe the order should be read A Song of Ice and Fire, then read The World of Ice and Fire and Fire and Blood. Princess and the Queen and the Rogue Prince are mostly covered in those 2 books. I don't even know if you need to read both of them and Fire and Blood and The World of Ice and Fire, but you can. And then maybe the Dunk and Egg novellas at the end. Maybe that's what we could suggest after this brief conversation. But others may have other suggestions. Your mileage may vary.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to our friend Patman23, that's his Twitter handle, for noting that Grey Worm was the first through the gates, a la Thoros at Pike. Speaking of flexing the book knowledge, that's, of course, that is mentioned in the show, but it's the book readers are usually the ones who are on top of those historical details like that.
Probably not drunk, though.
Probably not drunk. I don't think Grey Worm was drunk, but Thoros apparently, yes, quite drunk. I do like how they discussed that scene in season 7 with Thoros. That was cool. Marilyn Sands says, I find it most interesting how the social media channels and the democratization of journalism via internet has led to this interactive form of consuming of cultural products like movies and TV series. Isn't it fantastic that the fandom has had an impact on the way TV is being produced? And not even by being polls or market search, but proactively. We contribute to the stories that are being told. Example being the phrase Clegane Bowl being used by the showrunners. So that was, kind of a fan invention, that name. And Game of Thrones not only shows an impact on pulp culture, but also reshaped the constellation of cultural creators and recipients. And in this context only can I understand how people actually claim to be disappointed in the show because they feel like they can expect their personal favorite story to be told. That's a good way to say it. And she finishes up here, as for me, I am still pretty impressed by the story the TV show tells. Whomever the writing credit belongs to, the show obviously makes us feel something and has us debate complex moral conundra, and that is exactly what cultural products should provide. And I guess it needs the disappointment and the pain to be significant. So let's all be happy on a meta level to be part of this amazing experience. It's true, like, if some main character on another show, just who was a good guy all along, just all of a sudden turned on civilians and burned them, we wouldn't be talking about it because that show's not as popular. And we wouldn't all be able to share that view and relate to it and have our own takes because we didn't see it. We don't know what they're talking about. But Game of Thrones was watched by millions of people, and that changes its value as a cultural significance because of how many people are impacted by it. Do y'all have a take on that? Joe, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think that's a great take. It does have its positives and disadvantages maybe in reaction and when people start feeling, or fans start feeling they're owed something. You can take it both ways. I think it's very similar to what the difference between the current Star Wars films and the older ones, what the older ones have been like if you had this kind of input from everybody and the social media that we have now. Or, you can put it to Harry Potter or anything, really. But it is good, and you can see how culturally significant Game of Thrones is, because I don't think this would work with anything else, not nearly as strongly anyway.
Right on. Lady Gwyn.
Yeah, it makes an interesting point about fans' expectations, as far as the story that they're going to hear. It almost makes me wonder if we're all a little bit like Dany, because we're expecting, we're entitled to have this thing, whatever it may be, X outcome that we think will happen. And, when that
meta.
doesn't happen, we want to burn it to the ground. But I do agree that, we should move beyond that and be happy that we're part of this experience. It's an amazing cultural phenomenon, and we're all a part of it and contributing in various ways. So I'm just on that level happy to be a part of it and talking about it with
great
other
take.
great people.
Yeah, great take. It's true, the expectations, and that comes up with Dany too. What we were just talking about is that we shouldn't have had this expectation for Dany's endgame being so positive if her endgame was taking the throne, which we also know is not a good thing for anyone to take the throne. It's bad. It's bloody. That throne is bloody and sharp and corrupting. Why would that be good? It's like what Lord of the Rings taught us. What's her name? Galadriel, when she's like, it wouldn't be good for me to get that. I would want to use it for good, but I wouldn't use it for good. And that's the same lesson here. It's really, really good. From Lord Commander George the Golden. Am I the only one who really enjoyed this episode? While there are always things to nitpick, what the fuck was Jaime and Euron? I found the juxtaposition of the stunning imagery and tragic events incredibly moving. I don't think not getting what I wanted is the same as bad writing. One of the most attractive qualities of A Song of Ice and Fire is the moral grayness of the characters. If an 18-year-old choir boy can get shipped off to war and end up participating in the massacre of an entire village, why can't the same apply to Daenerys? Yeah, absolutely. Why not? And I've heard that from a lot of people. It's like, yes, give us tragic, fully fleshed out, characters, male or female or what have you, and don't hold back. That is what a lot of people prefer, and they find it more honest in a lot of ways, even though it's in this fantasy setting, which is very fantastical. Any response to that, Lady Gwyn or Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good take. I do think that there is some valid criticism to be made about writing and,
no doubt.
and the way things were developed, the things that we've talked about a lot, like bullet points and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's moral grayness is certainly there in spades. So
oh yeah. Pretty gray. I think it might be a little dark gray.
Getting to the darker side of things.
Blackened by fire. Charred.
Charred.
Yeah, the fire jokes are not going to stop in this episode, y'all. Just really not going to stop. So a couple of people have related questions here or comments from Kissed by Fireworms. Speaking of bullet points, maybe it's a better topic for Wednesday because this comment was made on Monday. But could John Connington get triggered by the bells, wreck the city, and Dany gets blamed? In fact, yes, we have that same thought, and we have a long section written about the Battle of the Bells and how this could relate. So sit tight. We'll get to that shortly. Anthony Gonzalez says, maybe in the books, Daenerys will be forced to torch King's Landing, simply in order to contain a massive grayscale epidemic, like they used in the movie Outbreak. The fuel air bomb used to wipe out a virus, and D&D just completely misunderstood George R. R. Martin's notes. Yeah, he's like stone men, not stone collapsing. I don't know. Stone walls exploding because of fire. I don't know. Yeah, and then Scott Westbury asks, is Jon or Cersei fulfilling the role that Aegon, as in Fagon, will fulfill in The Winds of Winter and or A Dream of Spring? Yes and no. Parts of it, yes and no. We have specifics on that plot line coming in this episode as well. So, yes. The short answer, yes. Long answer, coming. Zombie Jesus asks, Drogon seems to have hesitated a bit before roasting Varys. Is that a nod to book readers that he might be a Blackfire? Well, there are indications that he might be a Blackfire or have some sort of hidden royal blood or something like that. I kind of doubt the showrunners are giving that nod here, but I like interpreting it that way. I like the thought. Any thoughts from you guys? Not necessarily on this, but any other nods you may have noticed to book plots or anything like that?
Nothing that we don't have already. I mean, I think you're right that the showrunners probably are not going there just because they don't tend to do that sort of thing. But yeah. I like the interpretation. He did seem to sort of literally nod.
You're right. Yeah.
I see you, but I think maybe he was just warming up.
Yeah, whatever's going on in his gullet, it was like, oh, okay, rebooting, We have no idea.
Charging.
Charging. Yeah, he had to unplug his USB cable before. Did you have a take there, Joe?
I didn't take him waiting. No, I did think that people might start making a big deal about Varys taking off all his rings and maybe worrying if there's a Targaryen ring in there somewhere, but no one seems to. So maybe that was just me. I don't think it was, but I thought people might start making theories about that.
That's a good point. Okay, got a couple super chats here from John H. He says, there's legit problems with season 8, but in my opinion, people are looking for reasons to hate. I'm enjoying the season. P.S. Sorry I made you say herringage last time. LOL. Yes, you did make me say that. But it was comedic for everyone. From Sanrixian, can't stay, but sending love and support. Have fun. Well, thank you very much, Sanri. Sanri's...
shirt on.
Yeah, represent. That's right. The Blue Rose action. Sanrixian's work is wonderful. From Dana the Dreamy, shout out for Lady Charlotte of House Appletree. Right on, Lady Charlotte of House Appletree. There you go. From Mob Deep, what will drive Dany mad in the coming book? Thanks. Well, we've got a lot to say about that. We will get to it shortly. A unicorn sticker from Steven Stark. Well, thanks for that. Appreciate that, Lord Hand of the Queen. Prakash Thapa says, why has there been no involvement from House Reed apart from Mira Jojen arc in spite of Hallan Reed's friendship with Ned? Love you guys. Well, we can hope to see more of Hallan in the books. Do you guys have thoughts on how Howland will be used in the books. It just seems like he wasn't necessary because they had enough people to tell the parentage reveal. But there could be more to Howland also. As we pointed out in our Bloodraven episode, he was the one that sent Jojen and Mira to Bran when he heard about the dream. So he's got some thoughts on the magical end as well. So I think that makes him interesting. What do y'all think? Joe, you first this time.
I think a lot of people have obviously put him together with Jon's revealing. So I won't repeat that, but I could see them becoming involved. The neck is going to be way more strategically important in the books at some point, especially obviously when it all kicks off. So I don't know if maybe they'll come out of hiding and use that in some way, reveal some good swamp secrets, how to stop people. That would be interesting.
Swamp secrets, yeah. Trademark. All right, Lady Gwyn, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Howland is obviously going to be important to both Jon's parentage reveal, and I think he's got some knowledge of, sort of what Robb left behind, because he's got a couple of important people who were with Robb who are now presumably with him. But also Howland is, that's kind of the political level, but he's also the only person in the books that has been to this Isle of Faces. And George has said that the Green Men will come to the fore. So, we've talked about things like, action moving south to back to Harrenhal or the God's Eye area. So, yeah, I think he's got a bigger role to play. And just disappointed that Mira kind of walked off into the sunset in the show.
A character who didn't even have a sunset to walk into is John Connington. And this next question from Greg Mill, Soup Chat, who says, the bells mean John Conn and his PTSD will result in a second brutal sack of the city after surrender. But Dany still goes dark after being rejected by the population. She bathes city in fire, and wildfire makes it annihilation. Agree? You're not far off from what we have, the bullet points of what we have written later in this episode, Greg. That's very close to at least one scenario we could see it playing out. There's a lot of versions of Dany getting blamed for something someone else does, or yes, accidentally igniting the wildfire caches and then being blamed for doing it on purpose. And you can see the burblings of that. The burblings? Is that a word? Of that beginning with Quentin. She's going to get blamed for Quentin even though she didn't have anything to do with that, and people already are calling her a kinslayer for putting her brother to death on the Dothraki Sea, which that didn't happen either. That was entirely Drogo. So that is just an example of how these rumors could work and show that Dany will be blamed for things that aren't her. And then yes, she could be rejected by the population that she's there to save. And it can get worse if she thinks she's destined to save them and has to get ruthless because of it. What do y'all think about that, the high points of that? Or should we wait till we get to that section to get to more detail on that?
Yeah, the thoughts are pretty expansive on some of those.
Yeah.
Save it.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll hold off on more Battle of the Bells talk until we get to that. It's a great subtopic here. One of the main book topics to boil up out of the immediate reviews here. So, yeah, we'll get to that in a bit. Super chat from Steven Stark regarding our earlier camera problems. Well, thank you for that. We got that fixed now. And then from C. Kalabina. Thoughts on Yezin YRL's theory on Bran as king with Sansa and Arya like Rhaenys and Visenya sans incest. I love it because it never felt right to have Jon or Dany rule the Seven Kingdoms, not to split them up again. Yeah, we'll have more to say on that kind of topic on Saturday when we do our predictions episode, but the idea of the possibility that Dany is going to be removed is obviously possible, that she won't be allowed to sit the Iron Throne, that she'll be stopped. Is possible. So we'll be entertaining thoughts like that on Saturday, because we can't say too much because we've seen the trailers, and that I can't not pretend I haven't seen the trailer, and that gives a few things away. And I don't want to spoil anybody. Chris Trombley, look at what Lost did to Rhaena and Rhaenyra. They weren't born mad, but went so, but had people to check them from going overboard. Dany is all alone. Great point. Yes, there's a lot of examples of Fire and Blood and Aemon says, in the show, a Targaryen alone in the world is a terrible thing. Rhaena and Rhaenyra, very good examples of people of slowly being left alone, so slowly having their family fall apart around them and being disconnected from society. Lady Gwyn, do you have some thoughts on that? That's a really good take.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, especially Rhaenyra, because uh, she had it won virtually. I mean, she was winning the Dance of the Dragons. It was hers to take, and as her supporters and the people that were advising her fell away, that's when she really kind of lost it, isn't it? And then just saw everything. She just went kind of scorched earth and saw everything turn to ash.
Yeah.
So
She stopped trusting. She, stopped trusting Daemon. She turned on people who had served her. Well, yeah, you get some familiar notes there.
Very, very similar. So,
Joe, what about you? What do you think here?
I think it applies to Viserys just as much. We don't really know anything about Viserys, the young child. For all we know, he was quite happy and normal. And then all of a sudden, all of your family is murdered and you're on a different continent. And you have Sir Willem and your baby sister. So he's alone almost straight away, has to go years like that. And you can see that slow descent into madness just the same. It's not really surprising. I think this whole arc that Dany's gone through in the last couple of episodes is very jumped up a lot of pity for Viserys, because you can, maybe even for her, she can see what's happened, and you can definitely have a little more understanding of why Viserys ended up like he did, because the same things happened to Daenerys now.
Yeah, isn't that weird? You ever thought you'd feel more than a little bit sorry for Viserys? Because it's like the thing, we're introduced to this character and he's immediately so unsympathetic. And it's hard to divorce from that initial reading, especially because Harry Lloyd, if you watch the show first, if you read the book, it's similar because George writes it so well, but Harry Lloyd really just deliciously awful.
I love Harry Lloyd. He's great.
Mm-hmm.
Really is. Okay, more questions here from Jennifer Shanley Clark. After 8 seasons of I Will Take What Is Mine with Fire and Blood, how are so many people surprised? I love this episode and that Jaime tragically fell back on his drug addiction of Cersei. Love Westeros history and Radio Westeros, my two favorites. Yeah, well, not everybody accepted that Dany would do that, or maybe thought that she would do it in a more just way, that she thought that she would aim that fire and blood at people who deserved it more. And that's, I could see that's why that would be surprising to people, that she turned it on people who weren't her enemies. So I do sympathize with a lot of different takes here, and there's a lot of different ways to see it. And that all falls back to expectations. And there's expectations. And this isn't a matter of having wrong expectations. Whatever your expectations were, they probably weren't exactly played out here. Maybe some people they were, but most people, there was at least some things that were surprising or unsatisfying or what have you. So there's room for a lot of different takes here. And that is part of the greatness of it all. From Klabina again. Is Euron Jaime fight in George's outlines? The show didn't set up Euron to die happy if he kills Jaime. Maybe book motives differ. I like how Jaime mortally wounded before he finds Cersei, and also what will happen with Yara and Asha. Well, considering this, we have some notes on this later, but we may as well jump ahead because it's kind of a standalone part. So let's talk real quickly about what they're calling off-screen the Dane Bowl, because Euron and Jaime are both Danish actors, and so the moment meant a little bit more to Danish people, perhaps. Because sorry that it was not the most exciting. The Dane Bowl wasn't so great. But I actually do think there's a little bit of a chance here for some of this to be vaguely book possible. And again, I use the word vaguely with intent here. So let's say he's desperate to get back to her at some point in the books, late in the books, and he has to do this for whatever reason. Let's say that Euron and Cersei is a thing in the books, and I've said that before. I could see that happening. I don't think it's super likely, but the Bloodstone Emperor married a Tiger Woman, so that's Lion Woman, Tiger Woman. It could work. And he likes royal-blooded babies because of the awful things he can do with their blood, and it can see that. So maybe Jaime's the one that comes to free her from that. Maybe Jaime actually kills. Someone's got to kill Euron. I could definitely see it being Arya or Dany or a lot of other people. But if I squint, I could see Jaime being possible. I definitely don't think it's likely, though. What do y'all think? Any hope of this at all, or is it just complete? They had to figure out something. They had to give Euron a death. Is it more like that?
Yes, they could have just let him drown, but no one apparently drowns.
Nobody drowns.
Nobody drowns.
Armor or no,
We
you
all
don't
keep
drown.
swimming.
Yeah, they're all Varys. Yeah, they all paddle, or they keep rowing like Gendry.
Yeah.
Water just works differently all around. So
yeah, I mean, it could happen. I struggle with the Valonqar storyline, which they did not include in the show. So, just kind of how is that going to play out? Because, like all prophecies in the books, it's not that they're not true, it's that they come true in unexpected ways. And so far, the first half of that has come true in a very unexpected way. The part about their children, Robert's children and Cersei's children, and her children dying, although they haven't all died yet, but that's kind of where we expect they're going. So I just struggling to see how we can resolve that with Jaime coming back to her in this kind of positive way. But we could be wrong, and I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of at loose ends with that ending, to be honest. So
right on. And Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, similar. It could happen. It's not something I've ever particularly thought of. I think it's probably closer to what you said about needing to give Euron a death in some way that was significant. I think someone mentioned earlier about him being happy that he defeated Jaime. I do think, or allegedly killed Jaime. But,
yeah, he was wrong.
I just think it's kind of they were never quite sure whether they were really giving us a slightly less evil magical Euron or a slightly smarter Victarion. They could have called him Victarion really and been done with it. It's very much the same character. They might have needed to choose a bit more safety there. I do think it was good to see Jaime win his final duel, even though it's very clear that he's not the knight that he grew up as anymore. Nikolai's definitely looked a bit older, rolling around on the floor with his grey hair there.
Yeah. I 100% agree that he was Victarion, especially in that final moment. Think of this quote from Victarion here. He would give half his teeth for the chance to try his axe against the Kingslayer or the Knight of Flowers. That was the sort of battle that he understood. The Kingslayer was accursed in the eyes of gods and men, but the warrior was honored and revered. And that's awesome because Victarion is not a likable guy, but that's 3 sentences and you get his character surmised completely. Superstitious, loves to fight, and isn't very bright, That's Victarion in a nutshell. Yeah. Like, utterly loves fighting, like, completely embraces this warrior culture of the arts, completely bought in, sold, like, nothing else matters. So that is somewhat fitting for a Victarion. It's not fitting for a Euron, but it's fitting that he's lost his fleet, his power base is gone, he's got nothing. But hey, that is, he still wants that worthy end, and that's how that you get that by fighting against a named figure, a famous person. So anyway, this is a good example of looking at the bright side. That scene wasn't good, but this conversation that came out of it, like getting to relive this Victarion quote and talk about that's cool. That's fun. So, I like that.
Great.
So let's, okay, and we'll come back to more questions later. Let's get to some of the meat of this. We talked a lot about Dany, and we've got more to say about Dany, but let's go back to the beginning of the episode itself, and let's talk about Varys. Now, Varys, of course, major character in the books. Hey, surprising to hear me say that, huh? Well, shocking. How is Varys a major character? No, of course he is. So we think that there's going to be some similarities here, probably, and some differences. And it's hard to tell because of the folding of the Fagon plot. That is a problem. It maybe put them in a corner in a few places with regards to Varys' characterization. But Lady Gwyn, let's have you take it away here. You have a lot of good notes and notes and quotes.
Notes and quotes. What they did do well with Varys is pulling in a lot of the things that he actually says in the books. He says in Game of Thrones, Ned asks him when Varys visits him in the Black Cells, who do you really serve? He's trying to figure out what he's doing there, talking to him in disguise. And Varys says, why the realm, my good lord? However could you doubt that? I swear it by my lost manhood. I serve the realm, and the realm needs peace. Well, this is what we were talking about earlier before, is, Varys being a hypocrite, because what he actually wants is peace for the realm to suit his own plot with Fagon, so that he can, have this Fagon's invasion or play out the way he wants it to, or, him coming in as the savior for the realm. So, but he's got a lot of other things that Varys said in the books that they really wove in to his arc, and specifically to this episode. He says to Tyrion, power resides where men believe it resides, no more and no less. That's in the Clash of Kings. In this episode, he says it to Jon. Jon kind of cuts him short.
Yeah.
But another great Varys line, and this comes from that Ned chapter, Ned 15, is, why is it always the innocents who suffer most when you high lords play your Game of Thrones? And that line is absolutely the thematic heartbeat of this episode, isn't it? So, Varys really, in a way, in spite of dark Varys, that, we have a lot of things to say about that as well. His words right there kind of nailed what we see going on the screen here.
Yeah, and like you say, there is some hypocrisy here that fits better in the books, because it's meant to be clear that Varys is a hypocrite. Where in the show, he's sort of, a lot of people just see him as a good guy, which, this is the dude that engineered a Dothraki invasion just to change who was in charge. Like, that comes with a lot of implied collateral damage, probably far more than just what happened at King's Landing. And so they both engineered similar things, but for different reasons. And I think that's a casualty of them cutting this Fagon plot, is it doesn't neatly fold up so well. And the little things like the little birds, for example. And in that scene on Sunday, Varys is using this little girl to try to poison Daenerys, right? And that's you can see that that's a little dark, using a little girl to commit murder. But in the books, he's cutting their tongues out and teaching them secret languages, and meanwhile talking about how it's for the realm. It's like, ooh, that's dark. He's very ruthless. Yeah. And so, Joe, let's get your takes here.
Well, firstly, I'm just glad that we got a Varys who ended with conviction. He didn't, I think he said like 2 lines in the first 3 episodes, not much more in season 7. He was definitely my worry before the season, that he would kind of just drift into the background and off he goes. So this was a much better ending, that he went off with a strong point. He definitely won me over last week, and he kept that up. He, like you say, he is quite different to his book counterpart. His book counterpart is much darker. He's nicer in the show, but he's not that nice, as you say. He's got the Dothraki invasion, and I think they actually made a quite clear hints that, I think the girl's name was Martha, and she was saying about the soldiers watching her, and he's almost, like the implication would be that if she was caught, something bad would happen, and he's kind of tricking her into like not caring about that. So he's definitely not innocent, but he is nicer, and he has a much clearer end goal in the show. There's a lot of loose ends still for Varys. It's not nearly as clear cut yet, because so much can still happen.
So in the books, in the the extended material, the Dance of the Dragons material, we learn that Larys Strong, whose name is suspiciously similar to Varys, only 1 letter different. How about that? A master of whispers who changed sides multiple times during the Dance of the Dragons. And had a strange and interesting physical deformity that was associated with magic after his death. What do we think of this as a potential death for him in the books? Of course, the line "Beware the perfumed seneschal" from Quaithe has been certainly applied to Daenerys as her arc, and who that might be. And Varys is a very popular choice for that. But he can't exactly be a traitor to Daenerys in the books, can he? He's never really been on her side. He's always used her as a front. And then once she hatched the dragons, they changed their plan to, let's marry her to our candidate. So Joe, what do you think about some of these changes and differences from folding up the Fagon plot and what we might expect for Varys versus Dany and for Varys's death in the books? If you could weigh in on any of that, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult because there's so many options left. Obviously, we expect Fagon to get to King's Landing and him to come into contest with Daenerys. But as for how Fagon, or even if he falls and then what happens to Daenerys, there's a lot left out there. So I'm most interested in what would happen if Fagon does die and Varys survives. Does he, was he putting all his eggs on young Griff there, and now he's just completely abandoned it? Maybe even goes a bit Daenerys and goes, well, if that's it, I'm going to blow the whole thing up. Or does he then think, well, there's still Daenerys? Maybe he can convince himself into going like that, even though it's not his. If he is a Blackfire, that's not really his aim, but maybe he can get across there. There's just so many tangents still to wrap up that it's really, really hard to guess, but it's really interesting for me.
I could see us getting to this point in the books as if, let's say, Dany slays the lie of Fagon in a way that allows Varys to accept it and be a part of her regime going forward. And then Jon's parentage comes out, and then Varys switches to Team Jon. Then we could end up in a similar place as we are right now in a lot of ways. Lady Gwyn, do you have any thoughts on that? Or should we move on to Tyrion? We can relate Tyrion to this if you like.
Yeah, well, I just say that I think that Varys wants to be on the winning side, and I could definitely see it going that way in the books. I mean, he's already changed his plan, and it's Varys and Illyrio, right? And there's that great quote about, what is their plan? The fat man's plan changes every time the wind blows, or something like that, which is a great meta quote from George in Dance with Dragons. But yeah, I mean, they are constantly adjusting to circumstances. So
yeah, like, wait, what fat man are you talking about? Which fat man is that?
Yeah.
That's good. Very meta indeed. Okay, so let's talk about Tyrion, which of course relates to Varys very much. And if you wonder if Varys is going to be on Team Dany and switch to Team Jon, Tyrion is more clearly going to be on Team Dany in the books. Not 100% likely, but more clearly the way things are going. And so you wonder if they'll have similar relationship in the books, because it's pretty clear that, from behind the episode, they point out that Tyrion considers Varys his best friend. And that makes sense. They've been together a lot. They have similar morals and views on a lot of things. They sit together drinking, several scenes like that. And this is tough. Like, it's another thing that's easy to miss and not focus on because the Dany stuff is so overwhelming. The action is so overwhelming. Tyrion is just a sad sack right now. Nothing has worked. His military advice stank. His other advice wasn't accepted and may not have worked anyway. Jaime didn't work. The bells didn't work. He turned on Varys, and Varys looks right from his perspective. I mean, yikes. And now he's got to face Daenerys possibly coming at him for setting Jaime free if she figures out that happened, which is not unlikely. So Tyrion and Dany and Tyrion and Varys, that's what I want to get at, because actually, obviously his arc right now in the show revolves around those two things, or did in Varys's case. And how that could play out in the books is super interesting and super relevant. So let's start with you this time, Lady Gwyn. Yeah. What do you think about Varys and Tyrion and Dany?
Well, as far as Varys and Tyrion go, there is. It's interesting that they characterize them as best friends, because there's this great quote from A Clash of Kings where Tyrion says to Varys, "Sometimes I feel as though you're my best friend, and sometimes I feel you're my worst enemy." And that's, encapsulates kind of Varys being who he is. He's pretty hard to pin down, and he does change his allegiance depending on the situation.
Maybe we should see that line as foreshadowing. It's just striking me as that maybe that is.
Yeah. Huh. Right. Yeah. I mean, let's not forget that Varys did save Tyrion in the books. He's the one, and he didn't bother with Ned. I actually was just rereading Ned's chapters, and there he is in the black cells, and Ned says to him, well, can't you save me? And Varys says, I could, but I won't. And
Great
yet,
point.
not that long later, just, short number of months later, relatively speaking, he has Tyrion in the black cells, and he spirits him away. So, there's definitely a connection between them there. So
good catch. Very good catch.
Yeah, really good.
Joe, let's hear from you.
Well, we've got some really good characters saying goodbye moments, and Tyrion and Varys was the first. That was really touching moment of them saying goodbye and Tyrion admitting that it was him. And it was almost like a nod of respect that Tyrion had outmaneuvered Varys, even though it wasn't really much of a maneuver, but still. In a longer season, I would have really liked to see a few episodes of Tyrion and Varys trying to out-politic each other on Dragonstone, or they both try and keep Daenerys oblivious. It would have been quite fun to see. There's more room for that to happen in the books, obviously. There's just a lot more space, especially if Varys eventually does come over to Daenerys. If Daenerys perhaps holds King's Landing for a time or somewhere else, maybe Varys even comes over on Tyrion's suggestion. Maybe Tyrion remembers that it was Varys who saved him and that he is actually quite good as a Master's Whisperers. So maybe he gets him on Dany's staff, and then we get to see them go against each other. But maybe not.
That's a fantastic idea. I love the idea of like spy versus spy.
Yeah.
Tyrion and Varys. That would be tragic and long. It would take a while to play out too. That wouldn't be over quickly. The spy game usually isn't a slow burn, or usually is a slow burn rather. And of course, with Tyrion as hand to Dany, with the idea that she's turning darker, whatever you want to say, getting more evil, whatever you want to call it. I don't think evil's the right word, but whatever word you want to use. Of course, this can't help but remind people of Tywin and Aerys. So just as Tyrion is no Tywin, Dany is no Aerys, but you can't not see some of those parallels. Lady Gwyn, break us into some of these.
Yeah, I just and obviously Varys has a connection with Aerys as well. I mean, that was his introduction to Westeros. So having those two, Tywin's son and Varys with Daenerys, would be a really tremendous callback to Aerys. But it's interesting. Illyrio has this to say about Dany to Tyrion. He says Viserys was Mad Aerys' son. Just so Daenerys is quite different. And they go on to talk about her. And later on, although Tyrion has never met Dany, he tells Fagon that, he's listing all the things that she's done. She's the widow of a Dothraki Khal, the mother of dragons, and sacker of cities, interestingly enough, is one of the things that stood out to him. But he calls her Aegon the Conqueror with teats. So I think the distinction between Dany as Aerys's heir, or being like Aerys, versus Dany being more like Aegon the Conqueror, is an interesting one. So, yeah.
Right on. So I wonder if this is a theme we'll see in the books. So we look at stuff that happens in the TV show and try to weigh it and say, well, will this happen in the books? And one theme I want to take a quick look at is Tyrion's, for lack of a better phrase, lack of stomach for this job. And will that be a case in the books? Because right now, at this point in the books, dude wouldn't hesitate to do the things that Dany wants done. He seems very willing to burn it all down. He's much more ruthless. They talk about how he's Tywin's son, and he owns up to that in a lot of ways. If we recall, Illyrio's first job was to get Tyrion out of that suicidal screw-it-all mentality so he could be of use to Dany. And to your earlier point, Lady Gwyn, this is, despite the state of mind he was in, Varys still kind of wrecked his own career, his hand, in order to get Tyrion on their side, almost. You could almost say that was the turning point for him. This is like, well, they're going to find out who I am eventually. What we need to spend that coin wisely, and they spent it on getting Tyrion on their side. So they really invested a lot of political capital in him, in a sense. So I wonder about that, because all this talk about Tyrion and Varys being together, that would be kind of a hard turn for him to have to take in the books if all these people that did so much for him, that saved him, that brought him back to wanting to be alive and gave him a purpose, just don't work out and they have to turn on each other. That would be another bit of tragedy potentially coming down the line for us to face. But what do you guys think about this whole him having a stomach for this type of business? Because it's something they show in the TV show. It's a gradual thing where they have all these like post battle scenes where he's walking around, looking around like, oh, this is horrible, and maybe that starts to happen in the books, especially under the guise of him fighting against his own family, like seeing Lannister soldiers burned, that might be the part that is hard for him. You know, what do y'all think of that?
Yeah, I mean, they make a lot about Tyrion being Tywin's son, sort of, his sort of natural. He's learned the lessons from him the most, but I think that it could be that he has this evolution. I mean, he's so bent on sort of his own vengeance, his own path of going back and taking what is his, having revenge on his sister and taking Casterly Rock, which he believes should be rightfully his. But Tyrion is, I think, more, he's more nuanced. He's someone who will probably see sooner than later that that's a false path. So I definitely can see this.
Right on. So, Joe, I've got a thought for you here. I see you wrote some stuff here about Tyrion and how he could get to this point. And it occurs to me that the showrunners really, they dropped the ball here pretty majorly in a spot that it just occurred to me, like I said. Early on in the show and the books, Tyrion has this talk with Jon about all bastards or all dwarves are bastards in their father's eyes. It occurs to me how of use he could have been to an isolated ruler feeling unfairly treated for who they are. Tyrion could have had great conversations with Daenerys about how he's seen and how he dealt with that and how he dealt with being hand to a city that hated him. And yeah, that could have been really good, but they didn't really try to help her. They were just scared of her, and that's a little too bad. Joe, go ahead.
That's a great point you just brought up. But he even reminds us in this episode about his childhood and growing up almost alone apart from Jaime. And that's what we've all been saying about Daenerys, that she's alone here. So yeah, they really could have made that connection. That's a shame they missed out. What we were saying before, I think it's easy to forget just how far away Book Tyrion currently is from wanting to save anyone. He argues to himself enough about just saving Penny, let alone a city full of people who despised him and he despised him in turn. I think the show didn't nearly focus enough on how he was the most hated Lannister, even next to Cersei and Joffrey. The small folk still loved them more. He was the evil imp. So I do look forward to seeing how he does get back to that type of person. I don't think it'll be as simple as it is in the show that he's just really good now and wants to save all those people. He'll definitely find something in it for him. Like we say, Casterly Rock is still on his mind a lot. Show-wise, though, from what's happened, I think we do have to consider how heavy this past episode is going to weigh on Tyrion. It's almost a smaller reflection of what's happened to Dany. All his efforts, like you just mentioned, didn't go well. He was the one who freed Jaime. He told him about the secret route in the basement.
I didn't even mention that Cersei and Jaime died. I didn't even mention that.
Exactly, yeah. So he can, if he wants to, look at it as if he's killed Jaime and Cersei, which he probably cares about less, but still, he's ended up the last Lannister. He made the decision to tell on Varys, who had to watch his best friend burn because of it, and all those attempts that he made of trying to talk to Grey Worm, Daenerys, and Jon about the bells and the surrender. He saw it all amount to nothing, and even though that's not directly his fault, he's going to feel the weight of it. So that was a really horrible moment, watching him realize that the bells were ringing and it wasn't going to happen. And like you say, we got another shot of him walking through carnage and realizing there's only one small ray of light that I can see, really, and it's that little boat for Jaime just sailed away. So maybe Tyrion just thinks they got away and he can live happily ever after.
Yeah, he won't know they were in their own. That's an interesting point. Maybe he won't know. They maybe won't find the bodies.
He's not going digging.
I don't think they're going to go digging, but I could see the opposite, Joe, sadly, that he goes down there and he finds that sad little boat still sitting there. And
yeah, that'll be
that's
bad.
That's how it comes to him. It's interesting that in the books, he gets blamed for a lot of things that he didn't do. So it's very much like, some of the things that we talked about, and we'll talk more about with Dany, possibly being blamed for things she didn't do. And he says to Jaime, you're the only one that didn't think I was a monster. So, I think what you're saying earlier about Tyrion and Dany really having a lot that they could have bonded over. Maybe will still come to pass in the books, because it will be hopefully much more nuanced.
And they do have one more episode for Tyrion to try to talk to her about being isolated. Maybe could still happen.
Yeah.
So we'll see. That's Tyrion. Like we said here, his arc is not finished. So we'll obviously come back next week and see what's up. Hopefully he is alive for our final discussion of him in that sense. And another character who is kind of in a holding pattern right now, kind of waiting to see what he's going to do and seeing how his arc plays out. It's certainly not near done yet in that sense, is Jon. Adamantly refusing the crown makes some sense for Book Jon. I think it's set up pretty well for Show Jon too. He's never wanted high positions of authority. He's kind of earned them and fallen over backwards into them. And Lady Gwyn, you thought of another example here that fits with that, as well as Jon's thoughts on the burnings and such.
Yeah. So he first of all, Jon he's offered Winterfell by Stannis, and he kind of wants it, but he kind of doesn't want it. He ends up thinking that he is not going to accept it, and then he gets elected as Lord Commander, which he also doesn't really want. And we expect that if he's chosen or he's really Robb's heir as king in the north, he's not really particularly going to want to do that either. So he's very much, in the books, he's very much a reluctant monarch or leader type of character. I found, in terms of this episode, that his uneasiness with Dany, when she burned Varys, I thought back to Sam telling him about Randall and Dickon. In that moment, he had kind of the same expression on his face. It's kind of, he just doesn't want to believe this. In that instance with Sam, he tried to frame it in terms of things that he's done. I've killed people that disobeyed me. And Sam was like, no, it's not the same thing. But you could really see the penny dropping with him as he watched her. He didn't watch Varys burn. He watched her watch Varys burn. So this is a kind of justice that is far more reminiscent of Aerys Targaryen, who, if you remember, burned Jon's grandfather, although confusingly, Aerys is also Jon's grandfather. Remember that Jon didn't grow up knowing that. He grew up knowing the type of person Dany's father was. So what Jon was raised as is a Stark, and in the Northern Stark way, he who passes a sentence swings the sword. So this just doesn't square with the way he would do things. And I think
they also don't swing their sword at their sisters in the North. Or their aunts. Yayo.
Right. So there's that. So yeah, I found that taking all of that, you got the incest and this kind of like, not really sure. Remember what Varys said about Dany's coin is still spinning, all that stuff. It's really understandable why in the very next scene, he was unable to return her affection. I mean, he's already has been shown 2 episodes ago to have these doubts. He couldn't return her affection in episode, it must have been 3, I guess, because he had just learned this, had this reveal about his parentage, and he just is confused and everything. So Jon Snow is, after all, this is in character for him. I think he's someone who's completely incapable of dissembling. He's not a good politician. He's like Ned. He's honest, honorable to a fault. And, it may have been incredibly foolish of him to reject her at that moment in time. But remember that Ned made many similar mistakes. Ned's probably biggest mistake was going off and telling Cersei that he knew about Joffrey's birth, and that led to Varys asking him, what strange fate of madness led you to tell the queen this thing? And Ned says it was the madness of mercy. So Varys goes on to say, you're an honest and honorable man, Lord Eddard. Oftentimes I forget that. I've met so few of them in my life. When I see what honesty and honor won you, I understand why. So, Ned is truly Jon's son in this sense. And I just really felt it in that scene.
Yeah, just do a little thing and the realm is in much better shape. But nope.
Nope. Not gonna lie. I'm not gonna play that game. So yeah.
Yeah, Joe, let's hear from you on this. I see you got some great notes here.
Yeah, I think Lady Gwyn, you hit it on the head. If you ever need to persuade anyone that Jon, despite his real parentage, is Ned's son, then this is the episode. He's just Ned through and through, not only in the mirror that Ned also had to walk into a chaotic King's Landing once 20 years ago. In this scene with Daenerys and Varys before that, he said it. How easy would it have been just to kiss the attractive young woman that you already have romantic feelings for and save all this heartache? But no, Ned wouldn't do that, and neither would Jon. Doing the right thing, in his view, being honest, that is most important, even what that brings into question afterwards. Ned had some issues with burying his head in the sand, and so does Jon. He doesn't want to look at the question. I think all through this, Varys's words ring in his head that power is where men put it, and he's really struggling. He keeps saying that it's her decision to make, but I think he struggles with that in a similar way to Tyrion kept defending her in the previous episode, and Jon keeps saying that she's the queen and it's her decision, but I think he's struggling that, well, maybe it shouldn't be.
Yeah, that's true. And it's really interesting to think about. Like, one thing that I've seen that's been lost in the shuffle a bit is from Varys's perspective, and from the general Westerosi perspective, that it's easy for us to forget in the real world, is the way their genetics work. Now, I don't know enough about mental health and how it can be passed down, or how mental health issues can be passed down genetically. But in Westeros, genetics are much stricter. They just are much more straightforward. So for someone like Varys to suspect that Dany might get that Targaryen madness is a lot more reasonable than it would be in the real world, because we have the seed is strong and just infinite generations of black-haired Baratheons without fail. I mean, the genetics are just a lot more straightforward here. So passing down madness it's sensible in this light to worry about that. And especially in Aerys' case, where it wasn't right away. It wasn't from birth. It was gradual. And that's why Varys says, oh, that coin's still in the air. And he's not wrong in that sense, that from that perspective. I mean, he's wrong, but he's not wrong to worry about the impact of genetics in this setting. And that brings up some, uncomfortable conversations about real mental health. But again, we shouldn't see these things the same, because George's genetics don't work like ours. So the portrayals are one thing, but if we get into the root of the details, some of these things look a little more sensible, I think. But the bottom line is the same. You still have these dead people. You still have Jon forced to kill his own soldier the way he sees it, and things like that, right, Joe?
Yeah, he looked absolutely horrified by having to do that. And Jon's not innocent. He's been in battles and wars, and he knows what soldiers are like. But that scene really brought me back to, because it was season 2 or 3, the early Brienne scene where Jaime's her captive and they come across the Northerners who had raped and hanged the women. And, that the whole point of that scene was to show that the Northerners aren't angels. It's not Rebel Alliance versus Stormtroopers. They're all bad. There's no kind of good evil, and it's that Jorah quote about beast in every man. And while we as viewers have been able to see that, and Jon has seen it, I'm assuming, it's not been made a point to him. So I think his eyes are opening a bit more, and it's just a far stretch from a fortnight ago when he assembled this noble force all committed to one good deed. And now suddenly your buddies are committing war crimes left and right. It's quite a switch.
It is quite a switch. Okay, let's do a quick mid-roll break, and we'll come back talking about more of the horrors of war, sackings of cities, and moving on to how some of these plot lines could play out differently in the books. Maybe, for example, the battle against the others comes after this stuff. That's something very worth considering. Now that and more coming up in just a minute. Okay. Quick shout outs for a couple of folks who make our show possible. Thanks to our blood riders, including Vorsaki, wielder of a Valyrian steel arak with a dragonbone hilt. Kohokoi, called Sunpiercer, wielder of a dragonbone bow. Kokavo the Tamer, wielder of the wildfire whip Gehenna. And let's take care of our northern champions, who I don't think we've heard of, or heard from in a while, rather. J. Wilson, Winter's King. Sir Stephen, the Hammer of the North. Winter's King, Lord of the First Men. Lots of kings in the north these days. Lady Ardras, Mother of Wolves, wielder of the Valyrian steel claymore Manticore. Sir Brian the Returned is Knight of the Last House, wielder of the Valyrian steel blade Red Song. Sir Kobe of House Stonesmith says, words are wind, deeds are stone. Lady Cat Jones of the Big Pond is wielder of the Valyrian steel blade Ginger's Honor. Jake Snow, a.k.a. Jacob Ice Eyes, is the bastard of the Last River. Lord Darren of House Rambler, the last hunt is ceaseless. Lady Bobby of House Mitchell, and Bulweir the Purple of Heavenly Myth Head House Taurus, rounding out the group. Also, shout out to our sponsor, Studio Sweden. These fine horsey headphones I'm wearing are their product. Get a good look at them here. They're really nice. I had the first version of them. They're called the Regent model. This is Regent 2. I really like the Regent 1, and when they offered to send us a pair of the Regent 2, I said, yes, absolutely. I would love the Regent 2 because I have almost exclusively used these headphones since they gave them to us more than a year ago. And, well, a year later, I still love them. That's a great sign. So if you want to try to pick up a pair of your own, they're extremely well made. Like I said, they've held up. Nothing's ever broken. I've never had any problems with them. The battery life is extremely long. The Bluetooth connection is solid. They stick really well in my head when I'm moving around and being active. I really can't say enough about them. Go to studiosweden.com, and you can use the code Westeros15 to get 15% off. Also, that link is in the show notes. So check the description of the video or the link in the podcast description to find the address. All right, that's all the announcements and mid-roll I have. Let's get back to it. We have so much to talk about. Rushing through the sponsors and rushing through the plots. It's all the pace that's been laid out before us because we have 80-minute episodes where 7 different major characters die. Like, wow, how are we supposed to talk about all that? I pointed it out on Monday. 7 main characters died, 5 of whom were introduced in episode 1. And like Varys is 1 or 2 episodes later, and then the Mountain is, episode 5 or 6, and then Qyburn is the only one that's a later season. So it's like, yeah. All right, so let's talk about. Let's see, where were we? Let's take a few more questions, and then we'll get into some of these other characters, like the Battle of the Bells. I'm really excited to talk about the Battle of the Bells. Let's get to that in a minute. First off, more questions. Okay. Do you think, from C. Klabina, do you think Book Varys dies by fire or by Dany's hand? Any chance we find out what the sorcerer said? Is show Varys totally unrelated to book now? Well, to answer the last part, I don't think totally unrelated. We've already said some things that I think show some of the relationships and at least some possible ways it could go. And I want to say a word about predictions here again. I've said this before. I don't like to get in the business of just making one prediction. Sometimes that's all we can do because there's just no other good theories that I can think of. But sometimes but it's better to present multiple options, range of possibilities. That to me is a better way of trying to cover the bases. Although you can go too far with that and try to cover bases that aren't worth covering. Like, we don't really need to cover the possibility that, say, Cersei and Jaime are alive underneath all that rubble, Other people can go ahead and talk about that, but I'm going to go ahead and assume they're dead unless we see otherwise. So, Book Varys dies by fire. Yeah, I think very possible. What about you guys?
Yeah,
I
it would
tend to agree.
fitting for him.
Makes a lot of sense. What about finding out what the sorcerer said? I think no, but we might get more of a clue of what it might have been, like some clue to what it might have had to do with, without knowing the exact words. Any other takes on that?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we get some additional insight into it, but know, maybe he said something about King's blood.
Oh, yeah. One thing we all seem to agree on, book fans, is that there will be a lot more magic in the books. So that is certainly room for something like that to get fleshed out a bit more. Maybe someone just weighs in on Voices from Beyond one day and we connect the dots. Like, you know what? I was reading this book on Voices from Beyond. It's this book entitled "What Happens When You Toss a Spider's Member in the Fire." Yeah. And, well, that sounds familiar. Tell me about that book. Super chat from Kai Real with no question. Thank you, Kai. From Maryland Sand. I'm so impressed with this take on Daenerys' arc from earlier in the episode. Well, thank you very much. We're going to try to flesh that out and be even more succinct with it at a later date. From Laura Brandos, that's Laura Boros, the Lady of Infinity. Love from the History of Westeros Facebook mods. Well, thank you very much. We love y'all as well. You guys do great work over in our Facebook group, which I once again recommend. From Dornish Dan, Tywin wipes out the Rains, King's Landing sack, and Red Wedding. No one said he was mad. Dany, a woman, is said to be mad. But how much worse is she than Tywin? She's not, in my opinion. I mean, Tywin's list of atrocities is far greater, and he wasn't a good father either. And his legacy is that everyone wants to attack his kids and get revenge on him. So, yeah, I as critical as we can be of Dany, I'm 100% confident that Tywin is worse. But that's a good point about the hypocrisy within somewhat in the fandom reaction, but even more so in the story itself, which reveals that the men within the story are sexist, which makes sense that they would be, especially in that setting. Mm-hmm. But it's still interesting to note how that plays out. Any thoughts on that, either of y'all? Lady Gwyn?
Yeah. I think that just on a very surface level, it's easy to say Dany's the Mad Queen just because she's the daughter of the Mad King. I don't think necessarily there's always a lot of thought that goes into that. It's just a very, like I said, it's a very surface thing. So yeah, I mean, I think arguably Tywin is worse. And we see in the main series so far, this great sort of dichotomy between rule by fear and rule by love, which is Lannister versus Stark. So, in the end, maybe Dany has to choose between those two approaches. And she may come to regret her choices. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well said. Joe, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, you can paint anything in any way, especially in the kind of world that Westeros is. You can call anyone who kills multiple people mad. It ties into that same her whole art being about revenge thing. Well, so is everyone's. Robert's Rebellion, that was revenge. Tywin, to a certain point, that was about revenge. Robb's War was about revenge. It's the same thing, but none of them get called mad or even get called out for it being revenge. So you can paint anything anyway. It's a really good point about the hypocrisy. That
is really good, yeah. And to add to that too, I want to suggest that we consider as well the idea that maybe we're not supposed to see Dany as mad, but the characters in the story will, and that's maybe absolutely. that would really get us to the place where she feels that she's been treated badly, that she's been treated wrongly, and that gets into what Cersei was trying to do in the show, that they maybe could have shown us more to back it up, but Dany was saying that, oh no, these people are under her guise now, that she's poisoned their minds against me. They'll never accept me. They'll never love me. The only way to win them is to scare them. And that is a tragic choice, but she's not wrong necessarily that they are that now permanently predisposed against her to see her as mad or evil, no matter what she does. It's not right necessarily to kill them because they feel that way. But I mean that she's probably right that is what Cersei did to them, that she got them to think she's evil and that there's no way to change that now. Mm-hmm. So, but we're about to get really deep into that, but a few more questions first. Let's talk real quick about a couple questions here that relate to the mountain and Qyburn. From Lord Commander George the Golden, shout out to the production and cinematography of this episode. Loved the image of Sandor in the mountain on the staircase in the sky with Drogon flying behind, among many others. Yeah, it was amazing to see that. I mean, what are you supposed to do with the build-up to their moment is where the character beats are. But once you get into the actual fight between these two hulking behemoths angry and hateful. It's just going to be a slugfest. And so they did their best to make it scenic. And, well, it was damn scenic. Maybe not a whole lot else to say about that. But here's one that's a little more, gives us thoughts about the books from Ian Relaford. Because of Qyburn's death, do you believe he or Cersei had a mystical control over him? If not, why do you think he plays that role? Well, it's a good question, what kind of control he has. Long time we wondered if, say, the Night King or the others in the books will just like steal him away and take control of him over or something like that. And the idea that he loses control of his own monster is, well, that's straight from Frankenstein, isn't it? Any thoughts on Qyburn's death? Lady Gwyn, we'll start with you this time.
Well,
or the Mountain versus the Hound, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on Qyburn's death were basically just Frankenstein. Actually, Yolkboy and I, watching Sunday night, and when that happened, we both looked at each other and went, Frankenstein. So the creature turned on his creator in the end, really, because he has his own agenda, which is this face-off with his brother, which it was certainly a powerful moment. I was trying to remember. There's something about fighting downstairs. I think it's Theon at Winterfell, but I was the person at the top of the stairs has the advantage. The person fighting downstairs. So I just had this kind of sinking feeling when I saw, oh my gosh, he's climbing the stairs. Like this isn't going to go well. But he landed a couple of good, good hits on his brother. It just so happens that the guy can't be killed. I mean, he stabbed him right through a couple times. So I thought that was pretty satisfying. But in the end, it had to be fire, didn't it? So
I have to mention that in case anyone missed it on Monday, the behind the scenes of that fight is hilarious because they're just really polite to each other. It's just of Half-Thor, it's like it's hours of 3, 2, 1, toss him into a wall again, and like they're thanking each other and being really polite, and it's just like, what? You're pretty gentle for a big guy. Oh, thank you. All right. So from Helena von Landstein, make Mordor great again. 666 super chat. Can we have a minute for show Cersei? LOL, RIP, lion people. Yes, she can have a minute. She can have her minute. Not a whole minute, actually. But, it is funny to think about. I don't know what they could have done differently with her, but it was just kind of all falling apart all around her while she maintained her composure as her composure became harder and harder to maintain. And that was cool for her. It was a bit of an acting challenge for her, but some people are like, they didn't have enough for her to do, but I don't know what she could do besides sit there and watch it collapse, Any thoughts on Cersei's demise outside of Jaime?
She just, Lena, as always, actually not just Lena, across the board, the whole cast, they're so great at facial expressions, just saying things without saying things. And, just watching her face as she just kind of lost hope was really very powerful. And then on a semi-comical note, when this Sandor and Gregor showdown is happening on the stairs, and she just sort of excuses herself. Okay, I'm out of here.
It really shows where the focus lies in that moment. It's like, when has she ever just casually walked past anyone in her whole life?
Nope.
Like people not. It's like in real life or in her, as Queen Cersei. Like no one ever just like watched Lena Headey slide by. Like, hey, that was Lena Headey.
There she goes. But she was. I mean, this, joking aside, that was comical. But then you saw her. You saw her really becoming a scared woman.
Yes.
So, she went from being the queen up above in the tower looking down on her city to being down there on the, on the painted floor. She's terrified. She doesn't know what to do. She's kind of looking around in circles, and she's all by herself, and she doesn't know where to go.
Yeah.
Enter Jaime.
Well, let's talk a little more about Jamie and Cersei in just a sec. A couple more questions here. Thanks from Daryl Hall and T-Bone Steak for the super chats without a question. Prince Ascanius asks, I almost see Dany's arc much like Tyrion's speech during his trial. You all think I'm the awful thing, and that's what I'll be, except she will be able to act on it. That is a very good take, and it relates to what we were saying before about Tyrion and Dany could have had some things to talk about, but I guess that just didn't occur to the showrunners. But it will occur to George. It's probably already occurred to George. Those conversations were already partly mapped out. Probably they may already exist in what he's already written for The Winds of Winter. But that is a really good way of looking at it. If she's going to be the monster that they think she is, very, very good reference there. From Dracarius Fire, super chat. That's an appropriate name for this episode. Thank you, Aziz, for your commitment to books and show. HBO knows D&D let us down. They are pouring resources into the spin-offs and will be epic. I hope you continue with these videos for years to come. We are absolutely planning on covering the spin-offs, and if Lady Gwyn and Joe want to come on to talk about them when the time comes, we would love to have you guys on to talk about them with us. Especially if they are indeed epic, because it sounds like they might be. Y'all hear that they're calling one of the Long Night show, which doesn't have a name yet. The nickname they're giving it is Blood Moon right now, which is kind of cool. It's also like, that surely isn't the final name. That name's been used a lot for a lot of other things, but it's a cool nickname for it, I guess.
Straight out of Zelda, that
is. Carol Funk wants to know, how do Jon and Dany hook up in the books anyway? Good question. I guess there's a lot of ways that could play out, but any thoughts on that, either of you guys? I haven't really actually, honestly, haven't sat down to imagine how that would happen in the books.
No, I guess probably quite similar to the way it happened in the show. I expect that Jon will be king in the North, and then if Dany comes and either takes Dragonstone or has made a base in Westeros somewhere, Jon is no fool. He'll think, geez, dragons would be a useful thing at the Wall. So, in his fight. So I could see him going to her just the way it happened in the show.
Right on. Any thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, there's still so much to be sorted out, especially on Jon's end about how he comes back to life. So there's a lot, especially if he's brought back using fire, if that has any effect on his relationship with Daenerys. But it's not even really set that they'll have a romantic relationship. That does mean the show would have taken quite a large diversion. So it's likely, but it's not for definite, even though I do think they will come into contact at some point. I'm quite interested to see how it comes about.
Right on. From Philip Wolf, no man has ever died from bending his knee. He who kneels may rise again, blade in hand. Balon Greyjoy. Philip says, Jon sure does a lot of bending the knee, possible foreshadowing the end of Dany Jon. Well, that's true. There's certainly a lot of ways that Dany could or could not be removed from power. One thing I want to point out that's very interesting about Jon here that I neglected to mention earlier is that he has loudly and full-throatedly endorsed Daenerys and said that we're supporting her, and he's a guy that sticks to his word and has said it publicly, which makes it even harder for him to back down. And now he's endorsed what has just, by extension, has endorsed what just happened. And his own guilt versus his own actions will be very interesting to see what they do. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. No predictions just yet. From Blue Duck Umber, finally Stark red shirts killing Lannisters. The North seems to be lacking on individuals with great prowess. Great Jon, middle, little, but nothing like the other 6 kingdoms, maybe due to lack of tourneys. Yeah, they do have their vicious melees instead of their jousts up there, don't they? We hear about that in the world of Ice and Fire. And it sounds nasty, like lots of people always die during these things. So, yeah, I guess there wasn't really a question there besides the lack of tourneys, maybe. But that's a great thought, good notice, and yeah, it was nice to see. It was nice to see. Some people didn't like it. Some people didn't like the focus on commoners, but I thought that was interesting to see the plight of the commoner from the street's eye view and not seeing Dany at all for the rest of the episode, not seeing her face, just the screams. Drogon's screams were constant, and the fire. It was just terrifying. Whether the terror made you feel empty or hating Dany or hating the writers or whatever you felt, it was intense for a lot of us, or even most of us. I love this joke, though. If this was a political slogan and these were politicians trying to spin what they had done or before they did it, Daenerys could have been campaigning on the slogan, "I'll breathe new life into the city." That was that tweet was sent to us just before the episode, and I realized I didn't grab the Twitter user's name. I'm so sorry. I used to normally like to give people credit, but I'm staring at this quote and realizing I didn't grab the attribution. I must have been rushing too much. Well, apologies for that. I'll try to get you your shout out next week. From Maura Lee, just a show of love and support for both you and Ashay. I love all the wonderful content on your channel and the kitties. Maura, of course, big fan of the cats, as are we. We have a new cat hanging out outside our house, like a stray that's been coming around. We've been feeding, and it's a real fluffy Maine Coon cat. We've nicknamed Puff Daddy. I called him Puff Daddy. Then Fluff Daddy. Then we realized it's probably a girl, so it's then went to Fluff Mama or Fluff Caddy. It's working itself out. We're trying to figure out this name. So, the sack of King's Landing, Tywin did it, like someone mentioned before, and it's a thing in military history. It's one of the worst things to realize when you study military history is just how common this is. There's been tens of thousands of villages, towns, and cities sacked in much, much worse ways than what we saw on TV, although we don't see it, and that changes it when we actually see it, even when it's completely fake. But it reminds us of the reality, and it's worse usually, like I said, in reality, because usually in the ancient world, there was the killing and the burning, but also the enslaving, which it's weird to say, well, at least Dany isn't enslaving them. She's only burning them. But it is true that that's a real a thing, that real war is far worse than what we're seeing here, even though it's really awful. And even though the show loves to kind of dial things up to 11, even George likes to dial things up to 11, they could have gone a lot farther with this, and it still would have fallen short of how the real world has worked in this way. So let me turn it over to y'all, and Lady Gwyn, start with you, talking about some of the examples from the books of how George has been building this up to reject war as a good thing, and to show that there's no way to take a throne without trampling millions of children, or at least thousands of children, or anything like that. So yeah, hit us with that.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about Tywin versus Dany, and Joe, you mentioned the Savage Beast quote earlier, and I have it here. It's Jorah telling Dany about the sack of King's Landing in Robert's Rebellion. He says, "I saw King's Landing after the sack. Babes were butchered that day as well, and old men and children at play. More women were raped than you can count. There's a savage beast in every man, and when you hand that man a sword or spear and send him forth to war, the beast stirs. The scent of blood is all it takes to wake him." And I'm sure I'm not alone in having that very much on my mind during this episode, because that was what was playing out on our screen. So that focus on the babes and the old men and the children at play. It was the child with the toy you saw, and women being raped and terrorized and burned, and men that were supposed to be the good guys turning into savage beasts. And really all it took was that moment of we're surrendering, and guess now we're not, and just for it to become this real bloodbath. So we have lots of other quotes about sacking cities.
George has written a bit about this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll leave the ones that are specific to Dany. I'll skip over those, but just to skip to Thoros of Myr telling Brienne, I remember justice. It had a pleasant taste. Justice is what we were about when Beric led us. Or so we told ourselves. We were king's men, knights, and heroes, but some nights are dark and full of terror, my lady. War makes monsters of us all. And that was my immediate take when the episode ended Sunday night. That was the thing that was foremost in my mind. War makes monsters of us all. So,
and you also wrote a couple things about the Dothraki and knights, and I think that's really interesting. You take the Dothraki, and their religion is that buildings are wrong. You should not have buildings. You can't. Right. You don't rule kingdoms. You destroy them. That's their cultural ethos. And Daenerys has brought these people to Westeros, and so if they get out of hand at all, she will be blamed for it. And frankly, they might have a point.
Exactly.
But but on the other side of the coin, like sometimes the knights are the monsters, Bran. Like you wrote this quote here, and that's so on point because the knights aren't much better. The knights are a little better than the Dothraki. They still rape, they still pillage, they still burn, they still kill. They do at least have civilization afterwards, some semblance of it afterwards, and they don't enslave. So they are a little better. But it's not a lot better. They're still monsters during the war part of it all. So it's Well, Joe, let's turn it over to you. What do you think about this? And I want to on this theme, and let's have it take us to Dany as well in all this thinking, and how this might have affected her in the moment, and what she might have been thinking as to how her soldiers would react, as well as what her intent was.
Yeah, sure. I'll get to Dany, but to reply to your point about the focus on the small folk and the commoner, I thought it was spectacular. I thought it was honestly one of the better jobs they've ever done in any season. The shots of the girl hiding behind the column and the man looking for his wife and all the burned people. It was sad. It was an emotional episode. I finished on Sunday and I was sad. I felt bad. I watched it a second time. I still felt bad a third time. That kind of thing doesn't get any easier to watch, and it makes you almost forget. Like you said, we've had 7 main characters, and afterwards I just kept thinking about all these people who've just gone through like the worst thing imaginable. They did a fantastic job, in my opinion. But to bring it back to a singular person in Daenerys, I keep thinking about what her mindset is in that one moment, because like you say, we don't see from her again. We have, when the bells are tolling, she's looking and she obviously has this kind of break, but we don't have an internal monologue. We're not reading, so we don't actually know what her line of thinking is. And I think there's 2 main possibilities. There's the idea of what you're willing to pay, what price you're willing to pay to get to the Iron Throne, which is a theme we've seen all the way through the books and the show. Stannis, it comes to Stannis, that famous either Gendry or Edric, weighing the life of one boy against a million or whatever it is, and he says it's worth it, and Davos obviously thinks it's not, and it's an argument, a theme that they've gone through a lot. So is this Daenerys thinking this is genuinely the price she just has to pay if she wants to rule? She's told Tyrion and herself that she's doing it for future generations, so maybe she just thinks that this is their price, although that would have made more sense if she only targeted the Red Keep and not all the commoners, but still. Yeah. Or is it the other side of the coin where she just doesn't care anymore? We mentioned earlier about the bells sounding victory, but really what sweetness is left in victory? All the people that she would have wanted to share it with are gone. And especially with Jon also now rejecting her, she's probably adding up that it's not really going to end up well for her and Jon. So what is the point, really? And it relates to me back to the season 1 or Game of Thrones lesson that she learns from Miriam Azdur and Khal Drogo, and what is life when the rest is gone. And I think that's come full circle, and she's now seeing exactly that again. What is the Iron Throne when you don't get to share it with anyone?
Yeah, the closest thing she has left to a friend is Grey Worm, and Grey Worm is this behind the scenes they're calling him the Angel of Death and this traumatized robot. That's his word, Jacob Anderson's own words. And frankly, that dude turning dark he's as scary as Drogon. I mean, he's so good at killing, and he's as her right hand man, he's amazing. But if he reflects her moods and becomes like, I don't know, I thought of how Dario is teaching him like how to be an effective secret police force guy, like learning the methods of how to control a population. And I don't think we don't have time for it to go that way. But it occurs to me that the Unsullied, like Jorah tells Dany, the Unsullied, well, they won't sack a city unless you order them to, and that's a selling point. And it is kind of a good selling point. But on the other hand, they also won't scruple. They're like, if she orders them to do the worst, they will do the worst, and they'll do it more efficiently and more awfully than anyone else potentially. So, but it's also really rough for a lot of people seeing Grey Worm turn dark like this, to stab a guy in the back. That was hard for people to see. A lesser version of Dany in a lot of ways because he's not as major of a character, but a lot of people like Grey Worm a lot, and seeing that is just, it's hard. So I feel for anyone in that spot. Hopefully he has a decent ending, but I worry about him in that sense. Let's see here. Moving on. A couple more questions. Chris Cabeth says, Daenerys did not die a hero, but definitely lived long enough to see herself become the villain. And that's something that could add to her own negativity. If she's not mad, if she's, mad in quotes and not literally, diagnosably insane, having to live with herself after doing this, that might not be easy. See, if she was like a Mad King Aerys and just didn't care, he doesn't have any oops, I shouldn't have done that, no remorse. In a sense, that would be easier because he's crazy. But Dany isn't actually crazy, I don't think. And so she might have to be like, oh, what have I done? And that could be something she can't forgive in herself. Like, for all we know, she's going to immediately regret what she did. Or maybe she won't. We don't know. Any thoughts on that, y'all?
Yeah, I want to bring this quote in because I think it really fits there. I was thinking earlier about this possible link between the bells and the bells in Dothraki culture, which symbolize victory, and the nature of victory in Dothraki. And we have this in their culture. We have this quote. I mean, you alluded to this a few minutes ago, but from A Clash of Kings, Dany is thinking about the Dothraki, and it says, the Dothraki sacked cities and plundered kingdoms. They did not rule them. Then it goes on, Dany had no wish to reduce King's Landing to a blackened ruin full of unquiet ghosts. She had supped enough on tears. I want to make my kingdom beautiful, to fill it with fat men and pretty maids and laughing children. I want my people to smile when they see me ride by, the way Viserys said they smiled for my father, which was a lie. Sorry, Dany. But it says, before she could do that, she must conquer. So it's easy to see if she kind of falls into this Dothraki way of doing things, which, she's sacking the city and, pretty much reducing it to ashes, that afterwards she'll have some regrets. If that was the price she had to pay to conquer, then she's had to abandon her wish to not destroy her kingdom and to, her hope that she could make people happy.
Well said. Very well said. I did not think to connect the bells to the Dothraki. We were focused on the Battle of the Bells. That's really good. That's
one of those things that came up like 20 minutes before.
One of many.
One of many.
Yeah. On a similar vein, patron Growl Tiger considers connecting the phrase "the things we do for love" in this light of Dany, thinking that the populace of King's Landing and Westeros will love her for liberating them as the slave cities did. And, well, no, that's not likely to happen, is it? Good call to make that connection. And, of course, in Jon's sense, Jon being unable to love her was part of her isolation from all that. Because Jon's endorsement would have meant a lot. He's the hero of Westeros in a lot of ways. And if he accepts her as a lover, then a lot of other people would too, just by extension. And by extension, him rejecting her has serious consequences. But we've covered that. From a couple other random questions here. Michael Sardina. Hey guys, assuming we get a similar battle to what we saw last week on episode 5 in the books, I think it's more likely that Dany will be facing Cersei, or maybe, which could possibly include Crow's Eye, or maybe some sort of Young Griff Golden Company Dornish alliance. Well, I think we could have both. But I don't think Cersei will have the Golden Company. That one I don't think we'll have. But I do think we could have multiple showdowns here. There's room for that. Any thoughts on that, y'all?
Yeah, I think, this is where we're seeing those kind of plot lines merge together. So I think that it could be multiple fronts. And, don't forget that Littlefinger refers to the three queens in talking to Sansa, and I'm fairly certain he's talking about Dany, Cersei, and Marjorie. That's always been my conviction about what that means, and that seems likely if you have Marjorie as the figurehead of the Tyrell, who are, allied with young Griff and the Golden Company, and then you have Cersei, and then you have Dany. So you have a kind of a three-front struggle going on there.
Yeah, that makes sense to me as well. Next question. Let's see. We have lost my place from Bloody Ben Blackwood, aka Scott Wortman. Here's a meta observation. The last episode George wrote was The Lion and the Rose, season 4, episode 2. That's the very first shot of Daenerys flying over the city, as in the dragon shadow, was potentially filmed all the way back then. And he also noted that it's a little different. They may have, fixed it up a little bit with CGI over the years, modernized it a bit or something, added budget to it. So that's interesting. And that's his thought, is that maybe this is where they proof that George told them that King's Landing was going to burn and that Dany would play a role in it one way or the other. Now, one thing that makes us think more, though, is those curious little mini wildfire explosions that were going off during. There's like a nod to what might happen in the books. It was very curious. It was like, hey, they just threw that in there, made some fire green for us. It didn't go anywhere as far as the plot in the episode goes, but it certainly made us book readers think. Joe, any thoughts on that wildfire inclusion? Is that just a reference to stuff we've already talked about, or?
I think it was a definite nod. Yeah, they no way they had to include it. The city was already burning down. It didn't make any difference at the end of the day. So yeah, I think that maybe is just a nod and a reminder, because I think it's mentioned more in the books that it's kind of everywhere. Like there's places they don't even know all the places it is. So yeah, I think that comes into play at some point. Whether it's the actual use of it or just the threat of it, I don't know, but it will pop up certainly. Right
on. Okay, let's see here from Nancy Groth. I'm still in denial that Book Daenerys will go Mad Queen in the books. Will it happen and just be more credible from POV and with proper development? Also, wasn't there a show tease that George R. Martin had 3 big surprises? Hodor and Shireen being 2 of them. Is Dresdenizing Daenerys the 3rd surprise, or are we still do another on the show? Well, as for going Mad Queen, I think we've explained that pretty well, that we think that it might be a perception thing, but it might be partly real if the way the perception goes just turns her a bit dark and all the rejection and isolation. But I don't think she's going to go the route of Ares. I don't think she's actually going to have real mental illness that's, something in her brain that's not structurally, rather than it being these outside things that are pushing her. Unless you guys have a different take on that, I want to answer the second part of this question, which is the surprises. Well, it could be. Yes, it could be a surprise. It could be one of the 3 surprises. However, if we get a surprise king at the end of things, or if Dany dies, which is possible, or Jon dies, that could be it instead. Like there's that theory of Bran being the king at the end. That would be a pretty darn big twist. So I have a hard time thinking that D&D would just be like, okay, Bran becomes king. Yeah. All right. What's next? Next note. They say they don't react to that at all. Maybe that's not the biggest surprise. That's a pretty damn big surprise, though. Any thoughts on that question or the previous one, y'all? Lady Quinn's just too busy laughing.
I'm just laughing. I'm sorry, Bran.
Bran the Broken King.
Yeah.
I do think that it does serve to remember that Ares did have specific bad events as well. He had a turning point when he was taken to Duskendale. So it does relate to what happened to Viserys. He had a reason to turn out like he did, as Daenerys does. Like you said, I would definitely hesitate just to call her mad outright, because they've laid down what I think is really good development for what she's what's happened to her here. So even with Ares, where it's a lot more clear cut that he was actually insane, he wasn't, even though there might have been the groundwork, he wasn't like that from birth.
Yeah, like you're not going to see Daenerys proposing to build gigantic water tunnels from King's Landing to Dorne. Like that's the kind of insanity that Dany just isn't going to have, I don't think, no matter what. And I don't think, again, I'm a bit skeptical that she'll have insanity, a term that we're throwing around kind of lightly, That's part of the problem here is sometimes the English language is great because it lets us say so many things in so many ways, but sometimes these terms are restrictive because we're not able to use them properly. Like insane has all these different, like you could, Sean argued that Dany's actions were insane, but that doesn't mean she is insane. Just like Cersei or Varys calls Ned's release of the information about Cersei's kids to Cersei madness. He doesn't mean that literally, but it is to him completely bonkers. It's like, that's nuts that you did that. I know you're not an insane person, but that thing you did was. So it's a slippery slope the way we use these words. A related question from Alicia Clugston. Do you think Dany is more Mad Queen, as is being stated everywhere online, like her father, or Daenerys the Cruel, like Maegor the Cruel? Well, I don't think she's like Maegor, but that is a more apt comparison here. Maegor was like a psychopath, and Dany's not a psychopath, but she was behaving maybe psychopathically in this moment, and that's more like Maegor, who probably was more like that, rather than someone who thought they could build tunnels from King's Landing to Dorne. Which is, one is like, this is really cruel and heartless. One is just, you're planning impossible things. Your dreams don't make sense, dude. That's two different levels of. Any thoughts on that comparison, Maegor versus Dany, or Dany versus Aerys?
Yeah, it's definitely more apt. I think I have said earlier that it was a quote from the books that she's more Aegon the Conqueror than Aerys the Mad King. She's definitely more of someone who's willing to use her power in a way that doesn't seem acceptable to other people. So I don't think she's quite Maegor yet, but she's definitely somewhere in between Maegor and Aegon, I guess, rather than
Magon.
Yeah.
And Alicia also wrote a nice capstone to this comment that says, show Dany, just Dany in general, it's neat that Maegor, if we're doing this Maegor comparison, Maegor finished the Red Keep, and Dany has now undone that. Which I wonder too, real quick, do you guys think that the Red Keep is going to get destroyed or mostly destroyed in the books?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not sure, you mentioned the wildfire a few minutes ago, and whether there are still wildfire caches under, they're everywhere, in the books. It's clearly laid out that they're like this kind of sleeping horror under the city. Tyrion talks about it, and Jaime knows about it. So who knows, and whether she destroys it with a dragon or whether something like that happens. Maybe she accidentally destroys it.
Yeah.
Because she didn't know about the wildfire.
It presents us with a strange conundrum, because it makes sense that there's a lot of foreshadowing for King's Landing to be destroyed. But here's where it gets weird. The show gave us that scene in season 2 where it was debated whether that was ash or snow falling in through the ceiling in the destroyed throne room. The script reveals that it was snow. So they changed it, which is fine. That's the kind of gardening that worked. You could changing it from ash to snow. I mean, it wasn't ever explicitly one or the other in the show, so it's fine. But if George intended it for it to be snow, and then how do we get then is that a different foreshadowing for King's Landing being destroyed by wildfire? Because that's also foreshadowed pretty heavily. So that's very tricky. It kind of seems to, both answers seem to be pointed to, but they could also both be true. I suppose that King's Landing could be blown up by wildfire, and then the others could come. And then snow and winter could fall.
Winter starts,
Yeah, so we can have both. We can have both. One more question.
You mean we could have ice and fire?
There you go. Boom. One more question, and then we're going to talk about the Battle of the Bells and whatever else we can squeeze in before the end, because we're probably going to have to cut a few things. We can't cover it all, as we often can't. Lady Bird wants to ask Lady Gwyn, it seems that not many people have talked about Jon's post-mortem character in the books lately. Last we left off, the boy was just killed. What will the man be like? Will both Jon and Dany make darker decisions?
Well, I think we probably covered Dany making darker decisions for sure. Jon, I mean, it's not something we've talked about a lot because, we kind of tend to skirt. We all have this expectation that Jon is going to, be revived in the books, and we don't really talk about what that will look like a lot. So I think my expectation has always been that he will be a little bit darker, a little wilder. Definitely, he's gonna be a man. The boy was killed. The man is gonna have to take over. I think he'll find something inside himself. We have talked about him, residing inside of Ghost during that time in between, and what would that do to him? When a warg takes on his companion's skin for too long, he becomes more and more like the animal. So, he'll become more kind of wolf-like. And what does that imply? A little bit darker for sure.
Yeah, you're right. A good point. Good take. Okay, let's talk about perception versus reality. And what I mean there is the reality being the books and the perception being what we were shown in the show and how it could go differently. As we know, most of what the showrunners got from George was bullet points. Once he moved past the main material, surely he explained some things in greater detail, but also surely he's changed his mind on a few things. He is a Gardner-style author, and that means that some of the things he told them have probably changed. Maybe not big changes, but maybe a couple of big changes. You never know. So let's talk a few things about with that in mind. First of all, I'm going to recommend Stephen Atwell. Stephen Atwell wrote a great piece on how some of these things could be ordered differently in the books. We predicted that the Night King would be dealt with before Cersei because Lena Headey's such a big character and because they made it about the throne, #for the throne, all that. There were clues for this. But I don't think that's the case in the books. And Stephen Atwell and other people have written about alternative ways that some of these same events could happen in a different order and what that would mean. Again, like we just said, we just gave one of those examples. King's Landing being burned, wildfire to the ground, and then the others come, which would make defeating the others a lot harder if this population of people is not there to conscript in the war. Also keeping in mind that, of course, the walkers will not be taken out in the books like by just taking out one key walker, like Night King. Joe, what do you think about that? You wrote a few thoughts on this part.
Yeah, I'm almost certain that that'll be the case. That it's not a matter of just taking out one king or whatever it is, and they all go down. The famous George talking about Lord of the Rings and the little orc babies in the mountains. He's too much a love of logistics for it to just be that simple. I think this will be not a one and done thing. Even with the big battle, I just think the problems of it, they're not going to go away in a day. Not at all, or a night.
Good point. And you're right also that George likes the logistics, which is why I wonder if he planned ahead on the logistics. It certainly has stood out to me before that the human capital, the biggest population center in Westeros, is so close to the magical center of Westeros, the God's Eye, and near Harrenhal as well. And so the fact that you have winter culminating potentially around some of the same time that these things might be happening, culminating in these important areas. The fact that they're close together could be really important. At least George gave himself the ability for these story beats to happen kind of close together physically. While things could still be happening in the north at the same time, but maybe it'll be inhospitable because it's too damn cold. And Dany has this vision of melting others on the Trident, bathing them in dragon flame. And, again, that's near King's Landing, so it could all work out. It could all come closer together than we think. We talked a lot about Dany being blamed for this stuff, so we don't need to go back into that. But we could talk about how this applies to some of the book thoughts, and finally get to talk about Jon Connington, which we have been hinting we would talk about, and we haven't been able to. But before we do that, real quick, just to lead into it a little bit, just to remind everybody of just how different Daenerys is and how unique her situation is. Sure, she was told that she's this child of destiny. She was told that by her brother that her family had this birthright stolen from them. So if the if the Mad Queen is what half the realm is calling her, what will that do to her state of mind if she thinks she's actually a savior? If she thinks she's a prophesied hero, which she's being told. We have Bonero and Makoro and all these other high priests of Valor just flat out saying that she is literally a prophesied savior of mankind. This is something that no one else can kind of understand. And it's not just the prophets and the religious men. It's the so-called learned men of Westeros as well. I mean, Lady Gwyn, read this quote for us, please. From none other than Maester Aemon, a person that we all think is a wise man.
Very wise. This is from Feast for Crows. He says to Sam, "What fools we were who thought ourselves so wise. The error crept in from the translation. Dragons are neither male nor female. Barths are the truth of that, but now one and now the other, as changeable as flame. The language misled us all for 1,000 years. Daenerys is the one, born amidst salt and smoke. The dragons prove it. Just talking of her seemed to make him stronger. I must go to her. I must. Would that I were even 10 years younger."
Man, so strong. Yeah, Aemon's quotes are so good. And it's a segue here into Jon Connington. So it really strikes us how Jon Connington memories really conjure images of what we just saw in this last episode. And Jon Connington is the heart of the Fagon plot, of course. And of course, we've been talking a lot throughout this episode about how Varys and Jon and Tyrion and all these other things could work out, and how it could be Fagon sitting on the throne when the wildfire gets blown up, when the lie is slayed, the cloth dragon on poles being cheered for, the crowd's cheering for this cloth dragon when they maybe should be cheering for Dany. And I say he's the heart of the Fagon plot. I mean, I chose that word very specifically because he's definitely not the brains of that plot. But he's also very tormented by his failures ago. And the interesting part is the Battle of Bells for him was the turning point. Yeah, that was on purpose. Of his arc, and the thing that he looks back on as his big failure. Joe, let's have you read the quote this time. I put my cursor right here.
Okay, so he says, "Last night he dreamt of Stony Sept again. Alone with sword in hand, he ran from house to house, smashing down doors, racing upstairs, leaping from roof to roof as his ears rang to the sound of distant bells. Deep bronze booms and silver chiming pounded through his skull, a maddening cacophony of noise that grew ever louder until it seemed as if his head would explode. 17 years had come and gone since the Battle of the Bells, yet the sound of bells ringing still tied a knot in his guts. Others might claim that the realm was lost when Prince Rhaegar fell to Robert's warhammer on the Trident, but the Battle of the Trident would never have been fought if the Griffin had only slain the stag there in Stony Sept. The bells tolled for all of us that day, for Aerys and his queen, for Elia of Dawn and her little daughter, for every true man and honest woman in the Seven Kingdoms, and for my Silver Prince."
Your Silver Prince. And so Jon Con recalls thinking at first that he was in denial, that he couldn't have done anything differently. And then his buddy, Miles Blackheart, the then captain of the Golden Company, tells Jon Con, no, you're wrong. Tywin would have burned the town to the ground, and that's what you could have done. And then Jon realizes that Miles is right, and that's part of why he's haunted by this memory, that realization that there is something he could have done, that is something that he could have, that an action he could have taken that would have prevented the war from getting to the point that it did, and thus Rhaegar would have lived. And so he's haunted by that failure. It's a sad story, and the conclusion here of his thinking along the lines that he does, it's like, well, okay, strategically speaking, I guess he's right, but it's horrible, right? He's like, yeah, I should have burned that town. I should have killed everyone, and that's just yet another reminder that sometimes sound battle strategy is the equivalent to, atrocities. And that's yet another reminder of war being awful, and that there's no way Dany can take the throne, or anyone can take the throne, without committing atrocities along these lines. I mean, it's overwhelming. And it's amazing that Dany did make this choice to burn, whereas, and may regret it afterwards. Well, Jon Connington is sitting here regretting not doing that. And I just love that parallel. It's just like gets you right in the gut. Joe, you had some thoughts here as well that tie in very nicely.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to that Ned Jon point that we made earlier about what you're willing to do for the greater good, willing or not willing. It's the price you're willing to pay, and this is what Daenerys has cooked up, and this is
cooked
what,
up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. And then that's what Jon wishes he could have done, wishes the price he could have paid if he'd thought about it. And it's, yeah, you're right. It's all back to perception again. What's an atrocity or what's for the best? Is it really honourable to trick someone into chasing you into a wood and then coming out of the trees and killing you? Well, maybe not, but no one would question Robb for committing atrocities in that one, at least. Yeah. So yeah, you can link it to everything.
And in a patriarchal society, people are more likely to not trust women in power. And that just makes this all harder because you have, it's easier. The population has already been preconditioned to believe the worst about women rulers, where they don't believe that about man rulers. And so you can really see how by choosing to make Daenerys a female, like making this character when he's dreaming her up in the beginning, if he wants to give us a character who's going to be rejected because of who she is, it makes sense to just play into this patriarchal system like that. It just fits really nicely. That it'll reject her, just as it's rejected Cersei and Rhaena and Rhaenyra and these other characters before her, who may not have been such bad people when they were younger. Well, maybe Cersei was, but, you know, Rhaenyra, she kind of was too, but not as bad as Cersei. And Rhaena, she was okay. So, anyway. Let's move on. We have a little more to say. Do y'all have any more to say about the Battle of the Bells? Or else it's time to move on to finally talk about Jaime and Cersei's end. It's amazing. We still haven't gotten to that.
I know.
And we're past the point where we normally would have stopped the episode already. So,
yeah.
All right.
Oh, good.
Let's do that then. Okay, Jaime and Cersei. Let's talk about them. Let's see here. We talked about Cersei individually. We talked a little bit about Jaime last time. As far as it went, it wasn't not a whole lot of surprises. We wondered maybe if Brienne would come chase after him. Kind of glad she didn't, because I guess that wouldn't have gone well. I warned y'all that there'd be a lot of puns this episode, and here comes one. It's not a surprise that their relationship didn't work out. It was kind of already falling apart around them, and they always had a rocky relationship. So I'll stop talking now. One of y'all say something to remove the stain of my bad joke here. Talk to us about Jaime and Cersei before I go farther.
Joe, you have good thoughts. You have good thoughts there. Yeah.
I've always got good thoughts. I'm definitely not Daenerys. All good thoughts from me. So I've already written about this this week, so I won't go too much. But the death, or the lead up to Cersei's death, I actually think fits really well. We spoke a little bit about it earlier about her kind of maintaining this facade when Qyburn keeps saying it's not safe, and she's not giving an inch still. But when the bells do go and the people start shouting surrender, blah blah blah, and she realizes that all this the power and the protection that she's got from the throne that she's built up over a lifetime really has gone in an instant, and what that means for her and her unborn child. It must feel very similar to her walk of shame when everything is kind of taken away and she's just nothing. She's equal now to the small folk, and she's reliving that. I do think she must think it's kind of terribly unfair that Daenerys, a woman, has appeared with a dragon, because Cersei obviously can't match that. And in the books, it's a lot more focused on how she's almost jealous of men, and certainly jealous of Jaime, and that he was taught to fight and they get all the power and this and this. And in the show, she's actually surpassed all that. She's become queen. She's the most powerful person in the continent. And she's broken the glass ceiling on her own, bypassed all the men, and then someone comes along with a dragon. It's not really fair to do all these accomplishments and then someone just one-ups you like that. So
Younger, more beautiful queen, right?
Yeah,
there it is. There it
go.
is. Wow. That's really well said, Joe. Good job. Okay. Unless you have anything to add to that, Lady Gwyn, I have a couple other thoughts about Jaime and Cersei.
Yeah, no, I think that is a very good point. Cersei, you know, she hates being a woman. I've written a lot about how Cersei spends so much time wishing she was a man, that she, you know, forgets to use the power, and not the powers that she tells Sansa about, but she doesn't really embrace her femininity in the books.
Right.
And now, you know, here she is on the show. She's got all this power, but she's wielding it through. Joe is a good point. She's wielding her power through Gregor. She's physically speaking. But here comes Dany, who's a female that has her own agency and own actual physical power with this dragon, and that just must drive her crazy. And you can see it in her face as she's watching the dragon fly over the city. And again, that acting without saying words is amazing.
Yeah. That's a really good take. It's making me rethinking about that final scene with her and how desperate she was when Gregor stopped listening to her. It's almost like a little microcosm of Dany losing her people, that even Cersei in her final moments was losing the one person that she could count on, because he wasn't really a person. He, he's like, well, this guy, I can count on him. He doesn't have any interests or desires of his own. Apparently he did still have one built in there, which reminds me of Night King having still like wanting revenge against Bran.
Having that one thing. Yeah. You know, Gregor was much more of a beast, and she thought she had him more like her own kind of dragon, you know, that she was controlling, and then she lost that too. So,
and then she was really bereft and completely alone, and that's what makes that final moment really powerful, putting yourself in her spot. She has no idea Jaime is alive, let alone there. I mean, and she, for all she knows, Bronn killed him, so it's really incredible that she's like in her final moment that he just appears. It is kind of like we talk about Grey Worm as an angel of death. Well, Jaime appears almost as like an angel to take her away to the afterlife, because they die together, and he doesn't actually rescue her. He's just there with her, although he tries to rescue her. It's really kind of neat looking at it in that kind of meta sense of like, entering death together, but just how shocking it must have been for her to be like, what the hell are you doing here? And thank you for being here at the same time. Like, wow.
She might have thought she already died.
Yeah. That's a good point. Speaking of thinking she already died, that's a theory that I don't believe, but people are pushing forward about Arya, that the pale horse was her riding off to the afterlife, which I don't think so. But it's neat to think about. So that's another thing we haven't hardly talked about at all. We talked about how Arya at the last minute rejected the revenge arc, which is good. We're glad to see her back away from the edge like that. And maybe this is her back to humanity moment, and maybe we'll get something like that in the books. Joe, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it says something about this episode that we haven't actually, I don't think we've mentioned Arya yet, and yet she gets about 10 minutes of screen time basically to herself. Like you said, I'm very interested in what happens to Arya next, because she seems to be, there could be two ways she falls. She could listen to Sandor, she certainly did in the instant, about steering away from revenge. He essentially saved her, and they had that real emotional connection, and off she went. But on the other hand, she's also just lived through a horrific ordeal at the hands of Daenerys, right in the middle of all those small folk dying, and she tries to save them and fails, and all this thing. So is she going to go by Sandor's last message and leave it all, or is she going to try and have one last act of revenge? Because it does occur to me that her list, certainly her show list, is done now, isn't it?
Yeah, because it was Cersei and the Mountain, and they're both gone. Yeah, It's a good point. And also with regards to her, they brought her back at the last minute, and they got to do. Well, actually, not. This isn't to do with her. It's really to do with Sandor. back in season 1, there were a few people upset that Littlefinger got Sandor's origin story to tell Sansa, because Sandor does it so well, and it's so important for his character that he tells it. And if you've ever really dug deep, Rory McCann's audition is him doing that scene, which has him just yell, "Look at me," and it's really intense. You're like, whoa, I can see why that guy got the job. And so I feel like they were making up for it by having her grab Arya and say, "Look at me." And it was like, hey, he did get to say that to a Stark. They sort of gave it to him after all. I was very happy to hear that line. It did feel a little bit like makeup. What do you think, Lady Gwyn?
Kind of, but it was interesting because it's when he says it to her in the books, it's to Sansa, of course, and he wants her. He says, "Look at me," and she's scared, and he says, "Everything scares you." So, it goes fast forward to the show now, and he says, "Look at me." Arya looks at him, and then it's just such a callback because she goes out and she's scared of everything. She's and justifiably it's terrifying. Fire and blood and buildings are falling from the sky. So, I just thought, what a great way to tie that up.
She also looks, but Maisie Williams in that instant looks like she's season 3, season 4 age again. She did a really good job of making her look really young just in that one shot.
Yeah.
Interesting. Super chat from Little Angry Irishman who says, "I feel like they spent too much time on falling buildings." Well, if anyone's character dealt with a lot of that besides Jaime and Cersei, obviously, it was Arya. Arya was our sort of eye on the street there, our person on the ground who was dodging falling buildings left and right and getting coated in ash. And what do you guys think about the Pale Mare thing? I mean, obviously it's not a reference to the Pale Mare plot in the books, which is all about disease. But and it was bloody, which is, you can't not think of werewoods. Well, you might not think of it, but when someone suggests it, it's like, oh, yeah, that red and white. Okay. So that leads people to think that Bran was like saving Arya or something like that. That's no way to disprove that theory, but obviously nothing to prove it either. But what did that moment mean to you, Lady Gwyn, the Pale Mare, the final moment there, the way the episode wrapped up in that sense? And maybe if there's any book implications for that, maybe share that with us as well.
I don't really think there are book implications, just to lead with that. But I think that as a symbol, a white horse represents salvation, doesn't it? Or the hero rides in on a white horse. It's such a fantastic literary and cinematic trope. So it was a real moment when I think she needed that salvation to ride out. And what she is riding to is probably something that we all have a lot of thoughts about, and you'll probably talk about on Saturday. But whether she has some further destiny or if she's just going to give it all up and go back to just being Arya Stark. I think that the white horse actually can give us some hints as far as which direction she's going to take. So.
Yeah, I agree. And to balance that out a little bit, like you said, if she has another job to do killing wise, well, without getting too deep into predictions territory, I will point out that in season 1, episode 1, Arya shot a bow. And in 2 different times in this season, Arya shot a bow and showed extreme accuracy. And she has never actually fought with a bow in any battle. So,
yes.
I'll let you all come to your own conclusions right there, and think about where a nice little bullseye, why that might matter. But we'll talk about them on Saturday. Go ahead, Joe.
I don't think it was intended, but I didn't actually pick up on the Pale Mare Bloody Flux thing until earlier today. In the initial, I thought that the arrival of a white or silver horse was actually supposed to remind us of what Daenerys used to be when she used to have a silver and silver white horse, and it was just a bit of a look how far she's come type thing.
That's a good point. And of course, it's interesting that they killed her horse off in the show really early, which was like, why did they do that? I guess because they didn't have enough Dothraki for her, named Dothraki for her to have die, that they had to kill off her horse. Maybe also because like keeping that horse consistent throughout every season would have been a challenge. Like, got to kill the horse off, just like they killed off Sir Pounce. So they didn't actually kill him. They just wrote him out of the show. Sir Pounce escaped the sack of King's Landing. I'll have you know.
He's in the dinghy.
Very important. Yes. He grabbed. That's why Jaime and Cersei couldn't escape. They got there to the boat. They're like, the boat's gone. And Sir Pounce is like, see ya. Suckers. You knew. That's what we were all expecting. Okay, let's take care of a few last questions and then call it a night. We've been at it for a little longer than usual, but hey, we had a lot to talk about, didn't we?
Yeah, certainly.
Percy P2 says, I like to think that the being the monster they think I am line sentiment was shared by the Unsullied and Dothraki. They haven't really been welcomed in Westeros. Good point. Yeah. I mean, even Grey Worm and Unsullied turned on them. That's, yeah, they're not supposed to do that. So, yeah, and they certainly haven't. We've seen that at least a little bit. They showed the Northerners kind of rejecting them a bit. They didn't really show that in the South, but it makes sense that it would be even worse in the South because the South doesn't feel like they owe them anything, whereas the Northerners at least have the gratitude, should have some gratitude for them coming up and fighting the dead with them. For each of these questions, I'll pause briefly at the end. If y'all want to jump in with a take, go right ahead, but otherwise I'll just keep moving.
Keep going. Yeah.
Chris Trombley says, we saw one dragon wreak devastation and horror on a city. Could you imagine what it looked like when the Valyrians took 300 dragons to destroy the Rhoynar? Yeah, I have thought about that. We talked about it in our Rhoynar episode, but we definitely didn't have these visuals in mind when we thought about it. We just had to use more of our imagination. And yeah, it's exactly what I would see. Even like Euron, her blasting the water in front of the ships and things like that. You could get an idea of how it would hit the Rhoyne itself, because a lot of the Rhoynish population would be fleeing in ships and things like that. The visuals, that would be epic, super epic.
It's interesting to think, she's not that far removed from having two dragons, but if Rhaegal hadn't died, would she still be upset enough to have actually done this in the first place? Because if she had done it with two dragons, it'd be even worse.
Oh, good point. Yeah. From Ku Sullivan. Oh, I very much butchered that name. I'm sorry. Grey Worm was looking at Jon like it'll be a fight. Yeah. What did you guys think of that look that passed between Jon and Grey Worm? Did that foreshadow violence between them, or at least being on opposite sides, or?
Yeah. Opposition, I think. I mean, just because, the Unsullied are so wedded to Dany's orders or, following her lead. And that's exactly what they did. And then he sees Jon hesitate. And I think I'm pretty sure that Grey Worm would see that as a betrayal, a further betrayal if he knows anything about what's already passed between them. So,
okay. Benjamin Cairball asks, do you think Jon will ever be king of the North, or is that a placeholder for Stannis in the books? I think he will be, but I could see it not happening. But I do think yes. What about y'all?
Yeah,
I think he will.
Okay. 3 out of 3 podcasters agree. Jon will be king in the North in the books. So watch us all be wrong. From Bittersteel. Hey, good job with that name, Bittersteel. I'm a fan. I know you've talked about this before, but how powerful are you thinking Dany's dragons are going to be in the books by the time war breaks out? Very good question, because it has to have changed a little bit because of the 5-year gap, right? Like the 5-year gap would have given the dragons more time to grow and become strong. The show is faced with the same challenge, having to kind of accelerate the dragon's growth a little bit to make it all work. So George is going to be faced with that same issue. So I think they will be less powerful than he had intended them to be, because he's kind of sort of wrote himself into a corner. Not a corner he can't get out of, but it creates a small logistical issue there where he may have to have more misses and fewer bouncing off the scales. I'm not sure. He may figure out a way to fix that somehow, but it's a small logistical issue for sure. Super chat from Aylin Productions. Thank you very much. Super chat from B-Word on the wildfire. She suggests maybe the wildfire was the Pyromancers Guild blowing up. Hey, I like it. Yeah, that would make sense. From Brandon Wade. Thank you all for being smart, awesome people. Well, thank you for saying so. We definitely appreciate that. From Carol Funk. Do you think Cersei will be in power by the time Dany gets to Westeros? No, but I do think she will be alive. I think that's a theory not a lot of other people share, but I do think she'll be alive. Fire and Blood sent me in that direction with the whole Queen in the West stuff. And then maybe Euron foreshadowing with Cersei that as well she would have to live for that to be possible. But I don't think this theory is super popular. I don't think it's one that a lot of other people share with me. Certainly several people do. So maybe Lady Gwyn or Joe disagrees.
No, I'm on your side.
Okay. No, I don't. I think it's going to be, like I said, the three queens. So.
Oh yeah, you did say that. You're right. Okay. Yeah. All right then. Well, we do not disagree then. So we all don't think Cersei will be in power, but we do think she'll be alive. Have some sort of power. Not on the Iron Throne, but she'll have power.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. From Lord Commander George the Golden, is Sandor's comment, "That's always been you," a joke about all the different actors who have played the Mountain? I thought it was a really good line. I didn't think they'd take it that way. That's funny. But I thought it was a really good line because he can't converse with the Mountain as they're fighting. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty good line. Like, yeah, you've always been a monster. It's like, pretty good. But that is really funny because, yes, 3 different actors have played him. And one of those actors has since played other roles because he's the tall guy. Ian White was the second Mountain, and he has been all the giants. He was 1-1, and he was the giant that fought Lyanna. So he's still around. The taller, thinner Mountain from season 2. From Scott Westbury, what parallels are there with Daenerys and Macbeth? I am the wrong person to ask. Lady Gwyn, maybe you have some takes here, but before you say anything, I want to shout out Shakes of Thrones, who was on our Witch Queen of Harrenhal episode, which is, by the way, where a lot of the Euron, Cersei, Rhaena talk comes up in Fire and Blood. And she is probably the fandom's reigning expert on Shakespeare and Game of Thrones, hence the name Shakes of Thrones. And she has earned that name. But also, I want to give a shout out to patron Dan Campbell, who has often gives super chats. He wrote this really excellent piece that I wanted to share, but we do not have time for it. So if you happen to be a patron of History of Westeros, even if you're not, you can see what he wrote. Go to patreon.com/History of Westeros. Find the post for this episode, the video post, the live stream post for this episode, Season 8, Episode 5, Book to Show, live stream, and read what he wrote. It's awesome. He writes about, I put it right here because he writes it in Shakespearean. So it's, relates to this question by Scott about Daenerys and Macbeth. So that was a long way before kicking it over to you, Lady Gwyn, in case you have something to say about that. And Joe as well, if you do.
Yeah. No, I think to defer to Shakes of Thrones and in the Radio Westeros family, Yoke Boy is the expert, not on all things Shakespeare, but on Macbeth in particular. He would probably have thoughts about this, but other than tragic, that's
yeah, maybe facing what they've done and self-loathing after doing something that they don't like. Yeah. Like if she hates herself for burning King's Landing, that would be
for sure.
Right on. Well, is that the last question? It might be. It very well might be. Yes, I believe it is. Okay, folks. Well, unless y'all have anything we missed, let's exit here. Let's say our outro. Lady Gwyn, let's remind everybody where to find Radio Westeros and all that jazz.
Well, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, you can skip on over to the Radio Westeros YouTube channel and find us there. Give us a subscribe. And if you're listening to a podcast, well, find us on iTunes and anywhere you find your podcasts. Go to our website for links to all of that stuff, to our Patreon, and check out some of our past episodes on a lot of these characters we've been talking about.
Isn't it nice how our back catalogs sometimes just come right back around again because of the show?
Yes.
It is nice.
It is
nice. And Joe, you folks around here have only had one episode to familiarize themselves with where your work can be found, besides the work you've done for us here on History of Westeros. So let's remind everyone, shall we?
Yeah, sure. You can find some of my essays at my site, which is thegrindstone.co.uk. You can find my little podcast called The Eye of Faces at the same place, or my Twitter, which is Sir Buckley, SER Buckley. Big announcement coming tomorrow about my large Aswath project. So if you like people shouting about big announcements, keep your eyes open.
Cool. Well, whatever that big announcement is, we'll be helping you spread the word.
Thank you.
And looks like someone snuck in one last super chat from Paul Atreides. He says, great stream. Happy Wednesday from Tallahassee. Well, that is perfect because I am from Tallahassee. I lived in Tallahassee from 1993 or from 1989 till 1997. I went to high school and college there. So, and my mother and grandfather live there. It is basically my where I go for Christmas and all that. So, what a nice way to wrap the stream up with a note from my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I, due to having an extremely full bladder, will not read the Patreon credits today. I don't have Ashea to back us up on that. There's no fallback method here. So I apologize for that, but I do want to say thank you very much to our patrons. And I want to say to Denise of Lazar that Rebea, Lady of Waves, has summoned a whole horde of Krakens to come after you. So you got some business to handle. For our prediction show on Saturday, it'll be the usual time of 2:00. Sean will be here, and we will be discussing what we think is coming. That said, this next episode, they are holding pretty tight. They have not revealed much. The trailer doesn't show much at all. The stills, there's only like 2 stills, or there's usually like a whole set of them. So, but if you think we won't have much to say, well, what are you thinking? Of course, we'll have plenty to say, and people will have great questions for us. Because it's not just about what we have to say, it's about what y'all have to say and how we respond to that. So this is the community aspect of our show. All right, so thanks everybody. Thanks for everybody who came and liked and shared, everyone who gave super chats and asked great questions, and who everyone who's going to go out and go like Radio Westeros' YouTube and go like Isle of Faces and do all that stuff. Support the community. And we will be with you all for this final episode and for everything that comes after. Because, yes, there will be a lot after, and we will be here for all of it. Okay, everyone. Valar rewatch us. Valar reread us. See you next time. See that I can't be coolly switching things over on point like that because I have to reach over. I can't be smooth with the exit. Bye.